Chapter 1991. Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly and declined to comment. It was probably a dog-eat-dog situation, but the problem was that there were 2 dogs on his blacklist. He still remembered the wanted list of half-immortals, but it didn't match the names of the people, and the wanted list didn't have any pictures or portraits attached to it. The announcement at that time was more like a show to show his attitude, and he didn't really want to work hard to hunt down the criminal. Among the 3 exterior heavenly half-immortals, Dingshan was a traditional third decay half-immortal, while the other 2 were exterior heavenly half-immortal freaks. Even among the thousands of heavenly half-immortal freaks, it was hard for him to distinguish between the 2 that he wanted to deal with, so the actual situation wasn't as terrifying as Li Fan imagined. If he was magnanimous, he might just let it pass. This was a typical case of having a guilty conscience. As a result, he had put himself in such an awkward situation. Dingshan didn't care about anything else. He knew very well that his plan had completely failed. Even if he could go back and restore his cultivation, he couldn't come back to steal the treasure. The news had been leaked, and his identity couldn't withstand the exterior heavenly half-immortal's fury of the masses. If this person didn't speak, he couldn't move. This was his feeling. He didn't want to move, but he wanted to see what would happen to those 2 monsters. Maybe he could even see the famous Sword Qilong River. Thimble and Li Fan were in a desperate situation, and the resentment of the spiritual bodies formed a big net, firmly trapping the 2 of them. The battle was unusually fierce. For a half-immortal, dealing with 1 or 2 spiritual bodies was a basic ability. If one could not retreat under the siege of dozens of spiritual bodies, then one was strong. No one would choose to fight head-on. Retreating under the siege of hundreds of spiritual bodies was also the ability of a strong person. Of course, it didn't matter whether it was dozens of spiritual bodies or hundreds of them, because you could only come into contact with dozens of spiritual bodies at the same time. There were more spiritual bodies, and it was a test of a cultivator's endurance and ability to burst out continuously. Both Thimble and Li Fan were geniuses of the exterior. Their strength was not bad, and they could barely be called experts. They could still hold on for a while when dealing with the spiritual bodies of resentment. Dozens of spiritual bodies were destroyed one after another, but the problem was that they couldn't escape from the encirclement of the spiritual bodies. Dozens of spiritual bodies were killed, but soon there were other spiritual bodies to replace them. They kept killing and being replaced. Because of the sluggishness of the spirit bodies, they couldn't escape, and they didn't have time or space abilities. These spirit bodies grasped the space close to where he was, and under the strong disturbance, there was no chance to open a space passage. He could only slowly flee and kill until he could no longer sustain the huge consumption of energy. This was the most classic way for exterior and exterior stoneskins to die on the wall of mirrors. He wasn't killed by some powerful spiritual entity, but by exhaustion. In the cultivation world, this was the most tragic way to die, because you don't even have the chance to perish together with your opponent. Who would you perish together with? Was it related to these instinctive resentment spirits? There were still thousands of spiritual bodies surrounding them. If they continued to kill at this pace, they would be wiped out in another hour. But they certainly couldn't hold on until that moment, not even half of them. Ding Shan's trap was very ruthless. He brought into full play the experience of an old cultivator of thousands of years. Of course, if it weren't for the appearance of the swordsman, he wouldn't have achieved his goal. He might even have lost himself. He sighed with emotion. It seems that they can't escape from the tight encirclement of the spiritual bodies. Lu Xiaoyi smiled gently. Escape from the encirclement? No, they've fallen into the encirclement. In the struggle, Thimble was the first to make a dying struggle. Risking his body injury, he performed the secret technique of body swap and approached the 2 culprits in the continuous super teleportation. It was a choice that he had no other choice. The best result would be that the 2 people who were watching the show would dodge, which would cause some of the spiritual and physical bodies to shift their targets to the 2 human beings. This didn't solve much of the problem because Thimble's final burst was still the strongest source of gravity. It was still the spiritual body's first choice of attack. But because the spiritual bodies on the periphery couldn't attack close in, they would choose other targets in their berserk state. If they were lucky, a small portion of them would shift their target, but they might not be able to cause much trouble for the two people. But when people were about to die, they could always pull as many people as they could, even if it was just to create some insignificant trouble for their opponents. Li Fan immediately worked together. At this point in the battle, the two friends who were hostile towards each other finally reached a tacit understanding before death. But it was a bit late. He also burst out with the power of his bloodline and burned his potential. He didn't care about the future. He only wanted to drag these two despicable scheming men into it. After they died, he would let the spiritual bodies continue their berserk state and add it to the two new targets. He had to admit that although the possibility wasn't high, it was still a desperate move. As the two monsters were willing to sacrifice themselves to burst out with their strongest attacks, the spiritual bodies on the battlefield once again went berserk. As long as the two bystanders made the slightest movement and revealed their aura, there would definitely be spiritual bodies nearby attacking them. The commotion caused by one person might not be enough to truly trap the two, but if Thimble and Li Fan moved together, the probability of this happening would undoubtedly be much higher. These two monsters were using their lives to drag them down with them. Before they died, they displayed the stubbornness of cultivators who would never admit defeat. The entire battlefield became crazy. It was as if a tornado had swept up countless snowflakes. Who could do this without a single leaf touching their body? Seeing the two ferocious-looking monsters charging over with their spiritual bodies, Lu Xiaoyi's pedicure flying sword moved. It shook and once again drilled into his mouth to pick his teeth, but he turned a blind eye to the swarm of spiritual bodies that blotted out the sky. Picking his teeth wasn't the goal, but the sword was in his mouth so that the aura of the sword wouldn't be revealed. Dingshan hesitated for a moment, unable to decide whether to run or stay. But when he saw the swordsman not moving at all, he couldn't help but calm down. It was as if the sky was collapsing in front of him. There was a mountain peak nearby. As a result, he also didn't move at all. His aura calmed down, but his mouth was somewhat unable to hold back. Enforcer, you just finished pedicure. A large number of spiritual bodies crisscrossed around the two of them, but not a single one attacked them. Because they couldn't sense any aura, they only continued to surge towards the two large lanterns. Thimble and Li Fan roared and cursed, but no matter how they provoked them, the two bystanders turned a deaf ear and ignored them. Their only way out was to get close to the two people. However, under the fearless attacks of thousands of spiritual entities, their wish was shattered when they were only a short distance away. They really couldn't charge forward. The consequences of their previous close combat were revealed. Injuries on top of exhaustion. Their auras were weak and their bloodlines were out of balance. The spiritual bodies were like rain after a long drought. How could they easily let go of such a delicious tonic? Chapter 1992. Thousands of spiritual bodies surrounded the two demi-immortal evildoers, forming a terrifyingly dense mass. It was as if countless flies were crawling on a piece of rotten meat. This was a feast for the resentful spiritual bodies. Every spiritual body wanted a piece of the pie. This was their instinct, the source of their strength. No cultivator could withstand such an attack. Under the devouring, the spiritual consciousness of the two evildoers was completely devoured. Only two empty shells were left. The disappearance of Tao and the emergence of Heaven's desire. While Ding Shan was still grieving, he felt a brilliant light rising beside him. It was the dazzling sword river. Lunatic. If the two evildoers were still alive, it would be understandable if you wanted to kill them. However, the two of them were already dead, and their resentful spirits were currently in a state of satiation. As long as they continued to endure, these spiritual bodies would naturally disperse after a short while. Why bother provoking them? Wouldn't you be taking the initiative to achieve the two evildoers' ultimate goal of mutual destruction? The speed of the sword was extremely fast. When the light appeared, the two balls of golden light had already exploded. In terms of strategy, this might be a superfluous move. However, in terms of tactics, the excessive overlapping of the resentful spiritual bodies caused them to restrain each other in an uncoordinated manner. In the two balls of golden light, thousands of spiritual bodies were instantly vaporized. Ding Shan could feel the complicated changes in the Tao realm. Moreover, it was a Tao realm that targeted the spiritual bodies. He knew that he couldn't do this even if his spiritual bodies were so concentrated. This was a huge gap in combat power. The explosive power of the swordsman was vividly displayed in this attack. The resentful spiritual bodies were also afraid. Their instincts told them that there must be someone they couldn't afford to offend when such a large number of their kind disappeared. Therefore, the remaining stragglers scattered and disappeared in an instant. I allowed the two evildoers to be devoured because they deserved to die. I destroyed these spiritual bodies because they killed human cultivators. These are two different concepts. They can't be confused. Ding Shan was silent. In front of such a person, he couldn't summon any thoughts of resistance. The Sword River had seen it, but it also extinguished the last trace of hope in his heart. The two demi-immortal evildoers paid the price for their actions. What about him? In front of this interior enforcer who was rumored to be fair and strict, how should he deal with his theft? Should he die to atone for his crime? In any case, he hadn't succeeded yet. Lu Xiaoyi looked at him. These people's disputes could not be hidden from him, but the details were missing. He walked around the empty divine magic conch a few times with great interest. Yes, this thing is embedded in the positioning system, and it's an important node. What do you plan to do if you want to do it? Ding Shan had no choice but to take out his fake and demonstrate it to the enforcer. He wanted to be caught doing something bad and have to identify the crime scene. It was very humiliating, but he had no other choice. Lu Xiaoyi carefully observed the difference between the genuine and the fake. He couldn't help but sigh. Good technique. If one did not look closely at it, one could almost mistake it for the real thing. Those two fellows are quite capable as well. They could tell at a glance that you were cheating, but I was completely confused. Ding Shan was embarrassed. The two of them had something in mind and came for this. Now that I have the twin conches, it's easy to be noticed. If I take one of them, even if it's the real one, it won't be that easy to be noticed. The enforcer is focused on the great Tao, and his sword skills are unparalleled. Of course, he wouldn't spend any effort on the Tao of artifacts. In the end, in front of his own strength, how can the Tao of artifacts be refined? Ding Shan was flattering. For a third decay cultivator who had lived for thousands of years, this was the greatest extent he could bend his back. No one could understand why a cultivator would be so cautious in front of a junior who was thousands of years younger than him. In fact, this was also a part of cultivation. Lu Xiaoyi did not sympathize with him. After observing the two spiritual treasures for a while, he reached out and took the real one. Ding Shan wanted to stop him, but did not dare to. Was he just going to take it down and play with it? In the next moment, this enforcer Lu stuffed the empty divine conch into his storage ring. Only then did he realize that although this lord was an official to the outside, he was also a thief in reality. But he took it down in front of him. Was he going to kill him next? But this enforcer's next move puzzled him. He took out a strand of qi and twisted it. A white light rose and the smoke split into three. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. This empty divine conch was sealed in the storage ring, but it could not prevent the aura from locking onto it. He was experimenting to see if he could erase the direction of this spiritual treasure in the aura provided by the Grand Monarch. This was a necessary safety precaution. The space here was reversed, left and right, up and down, front and back could not be distinguished. After an intense battle, his spatial perception would be messed up, and he might make a mistake in determining which of the three branches was which. The best way was to take one of them away. This way, he only needed to choose between two directions, and it would be much easier. He really did not know much about artifacts. The cultivation world was all-encompassing and different professions were worlds apart. There were many things that he could not understand in a short period of time. After calculating in his mind, he turned around and looked at Ding Shan, who wanted to say something but was hesitating. He asked, "My smoke is split into three branches. Do you understand?" Ding Shan was very cautious. He felt that this enforcer was not simply stealing treasures. Thus, he guessed, the smoke split into three branches should be pointing to the three spiritual treasures on the wall of mirrors. but I don't know which one the enforcer is looking for. Or, do you want to catch all of them in one go? Lu Xiaoyi could not be bothered to explain that this unlucky state thought that he was in the same profession as him. You've been here for many years. Do you have any judgment? Ding Shan knew that this was a very crucial choice. Either the future was unpredictable or he would wallow in the mire. In front of his life, he decisively chose to wallow in the mire. The 3 branches point to the hiding places of 3 spiritual treasures. But I actually only know 2. One is this empty divine magic conch, and the other is the lamp extinguishing lamp in the other direction. As for the third direction, it should have appeared not many years ago and is in the depths of the mirror of mirrors. Few people know about it. I only vaguely know a thing or two because I specialize in this field and chatted with friends in the same profession. Lu Xiaoyi thought for a while and asked shamelessly, the smoke is split into 3 branches and points to different directions. How do you differentiate between them? Can fellow Taoists teach me? At this point, Ding Shan naturally would not hide anything. Thus, he explained in detail. In the eyes of an artifact expert like him, many things gradually became clear under his analysis. He was no longer as confused and foolish as before. Every profession had its own specialization. No one was a know-it-all. Chapter 1993. After the explanation, Lu Xiaoyi, a layman, finally understood the basic knowledge of spiritual treasures. This was not knowledge from ancient books, but the lifetime achievement of an old man who had studied spiritual treasures for thousands of years. Lu Xiaoyi nodded in satisfaction. With Ding Shan's help, some of his previous doubts were resolved. He could begin to track down the target of the mission. There was still no news from Heaven's Eye, which meant that the bamboo hat had not been obtained yet. Was this good news or bad news? He stuffed the empty divine magic conch into Ding Shan's hand and asked, I heard that you're only borrowing it for a period of time? Is that true? Ding Shan told the truth. It's true. But I can't guarantee that I won't change my mind after using it. But now, with the enforcer here, how could I have any thoughts of taking it for myself? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Then take it and use it. But remember your promise. After all, it's public property. You can borrow it, but you can't use it as a personal weapon. Ding Shan was a little confused. I can understand why the enforcer doesn't care about it, but I'm still stealing. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. There's a saying of stealing in the cultivation world. Whoever has the ability to take it is the right thing to do. Spirit treasures are meant to be used by people. Otherwise, they're just decorations. But there's also a bottom line under power. Back then, who put the spirit treasure here for the convenience of all the cultivators who came for the mirror examination mission? Their breadth of mind is admirable. Even if we can't do the same, we should at least continue this tradition. Only then can we live up to our original intentions. It's also the strength that supports us. Ding Shan blushed with shame. Before the effect of the fake disappears, the empty divine magic conch will definitely return to its original place. It doesn't matter if I've used it or not. This poor Taoist can't help you this time. It's really beyond my ability. But there's one thing that you can actually borrow. Lu Xiaoyi floated away. With your guidance, I've avoided many detours. This is already a great help. This time, his goal was firm. It was the direction of the deepest part of the wall of mirrors. He had been in here for less than a year, and his elemental force cultivation was still at 90%. There was no need for him to go out and recover. The environment here had something to do with the refinement of the cultivator's elemental energy. For a cultivator like him who pursued purity and not thickness, he would have a slight advantage in terms of attenuation. Most importantly, he didn't want to drag this mission out for too long. In the depths of the mirror, a figure was still moving deeper and deeper. As the man in the bamboo hat moved forward, he silently observed his position. He found that his current position was far beyond the coverage of the system of road signs in the mirror. He could still find the way back, but if he moved forward or encountered a fierce battle, it would be hard to say. Most importantly, if you couldn't find the correct way back, the mirror's energy extraction would continue. Sooner or later, you would become a raft that had lost its power. You would drift aimlessly in the void until all of your energy was sucked out. You would become nothing more than a piece of human skin. In the wall of mirrors, there were many half-immortals who died like this. and if one was lucky enough, one could even witness it with one's own eyes. But he had to go, because this was his karma. Having received benefits from celestial elder Wu Hua, he naturally had to clean up the old man's mess. Furthermore, he had to clean up in front of that swordsman, a two-person mission. He was very dissatisfied that Heaven's Eye had chosen this kind of companion for him. If it weren't for the fact that he was now a second severance, he wouldn't even have accepted this kind of mission. Although they were both primordial spirit, and he had taken 2 steps, while the swordsman had only taken 1 step, the swordsman's killing ability made him feel no sense of security at all. This wasn't cowardice, but rather the time wasn't right. There were many ways to fight for victory, and battle was only one of them. He didn't like this kind of method. He preferred more cultivation methods, and this was also the biggest characteristic of the silent sect. Silence, a rope to tie things up. From the name to the meaning, it was to speak less and do more. The silent sect wasn't sealing their own mouths, nor was it sealing people's mouths. It represented a kind of ideology, advocating that it was better to be a shorty with words than a giant with actions. The word silent itself had nothing to do with the characteristics of the cultivation technique. It didn't mean that they wouldn't speak after chanting incantations and casting techniques. After taking 2 steps, he could clearly feel his own improvement in the concept of Tao level. Previously, his understanding of Tao level was already very deep, but now he had a feeling of creating a new level, as if he was the founder of some sect. He was very clear about the significance of this feeling. When he took the 3rd step, it would be the moment when he reconstructed regulations. This time would definitely be the moment when the epic changed, because only at that moment would the universe allow new regulations to be born. Before making sufficient preparations, he still had a very important step to take, and that was to advance to Young God. This was the cornerstone, and he still had time. Different from taking a few steps, this was a real work of patience. There were no shortcuts, and he wouldn't take shortcuts. When he should jump, jump, and when he should be steady, this was the most basic sense of propriety. As for Tao level, he was now still in a kind of continuous sublimation stage. In the fall of immortal Wu Hua, he had obtained great benefits from the innate 5 manifestations. But for the other innate Taos he had grasped, such sublimation still required him a long time to polish. Like the swordsman, his goal was also to master all 36 innate Taos. However, Lu Xiaoyi could only master 1 Tao after breaking 1, because of the uniqueness of the small universe in his body when he ascended to nascent soul. He was different. The Taos he grasped had nothing to do with the shattering of Taos. It was completely dependent on his own accumulation. He had his own secrets, and also had the most suitable path for him. To him, the reason he could reach this step was because of the great responsibility bestowed upon him by the heavens. Every time he comprehended Taos, he would be able to advance at lightning speed, advancing 1,000 miles in a day, gaining frequent epiphanies. This was because he had a great ambition, and his ambition was in accordance with a certain will of the heavenly Tao. The content was that after the epic changed, the existing 36 Taos would remain unchanged. Such a wish was even more difficult than creating a new innate Tao. This was because as the universe and heaven and earth changed, the changes in the 36 innate Taos were already set in stone. The only thing he didn't know was which Tao would leave the stage of history and which new Tao would appear. His mission was to stop all of this, to maintain the current order of Taos after the epic changed. Who was the one who planted this karma in him? Was it really his own ambition, or was it induced by some existence? These things were no longer important to consider now. In a great change in the universe, if there was a reformist, there would definitely be a conservative. These were the 2 sides of the same coin, the cornerstone of the universe's smooth transition, an indispensable counterbalance force. He just happened to occupy the conservative side. Stemming from his own orthodoxy, there was no distinction between good and bad. These 36 Taos had been formed in the universe for millions of years, proving their rationality. Since that was the case, why did they have to change? If they changed, would they still be able to persist for millions of years? Millions of years, not only to the mortal world, but also to the cultivation world. It was a very long time, proving the excellence of this system. Chapter 1994. The bamboo hat traversed through the silent void, thinking about his own matters. How far a cultivator could go depended on how far he could see. If one were to fuss over petty benefits, disputes over orthodoxies, and grudges, one's achievements would be very limited. In the inner and outer realm, there weren't many real threats that he could see. Of course, he couldn't control everything. There were many people in the universe who didn't walk the normal path and kept a low profile. There were many paths to the upper realm, and for each person, there wasn't a path that two people could walk on. If one wanted to stand out during the era change, one had to be different from others. There was only one person who had a competitive relationship with him. Furthermore, his actions in the past few years had also brought him a lot of pressure. That swordsman, Lu Xiaoyi. From the moment he knew of this person, he had vaguely regarded him as his opponent. As time passed, his view was gradually verified. There were some changes within. In the beginning, his competitive instincts towards the swordsman stopped at the superficial understanding that they both cultivated the 36 innate das. But later, as the swordsman's performance in the inner and outer realms increased, he discovered something deeper. Cultivating the 36 innate das at the same time was only a small conflict, a competition between individuals. There was an even bigger and more irreconcilable conflict between them. If the bamboo hat represented the conservative faction that completed the unchanging innate das, then the swordsman represented the reformist faction. He was destined to reform the innate das. Under such a premise, there was no room for reconciliation between the two sides, let alone coexisting. If Lu Xiaoyi succeeded, the 36 innate das would be increased, decreased, and renewed. Then, the bamboo hat would die without a burial ground. If he succeeded, the 36 innate das would remain unchanged after the change of epochs. Lu Xiaoyi and the other cultivators who tried to overthrow the tradition would be completely wiped out. This was the truth of the Battle of Das. It was cruel, but it was a necessary process for the universe to change. It was because of this understanding that he knew that only one of them would have a future together with the swordsman. He also knew that his way of defeating this person wasn't just through battle. However, this kind of mission had forced the two of them together. This was why he disliked Heaven's Eyes. This wasn't a coincidence, it was intentional. He did not know what this represented, but it was nothing more than the filth and intrigue of the upper realm. He knew very well that he was just a chess piece, but a chess piece had its own value. There were millions of cultivators in the universe, and being able to be a chess piece in this universe represented one's ability. There were risks, but there were also rewards. It was much better than being a spectator. He had such awareness, but he didn't know if that sword cultivator had the same awareness. If he was a one-track-minded killer, then he would be in big trouble. To be able to create such a huge commotion in the inner and outer scenic skies, one couldn't be a fool. He hoped that the final battle between the two of them would be dragged to the last moment before the end of the era, and not decided to fight to the death right now. It was meaningless to decide the victor now. If the swordsman died, the heavenly axiom would definitely find another opponent for him. If he died, the heavenly axiom would find another enemy for the swordsman. There was no end to it. After flying like this for nearly 3 years, he finally felt that he was close to the target area. At this time, his cultivation base had already dropped to 80%. Don't think that this was a very high value. If he considered the return journey and then the battle, there wasn't much time left for him. He had a feeling that the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron belonged to him alone. There was a very unique place within the reflecting mirror wall. It was very deep, and you couldn't say that it was the center. It didn't have a name, and it was like a black hole that constantly rotated, sucking in everything in the deathly still space. Energy, material objects, sound, light, everything. This was why all the cultivators in the deathly still space, including the immortals, felt their essence, chi, and spirit leaking out of their bodies uncontrollably. There were many such black holes in the universe, big and small. Many of them had very strong suction forces, but at least the cultivators could feel it from very far away. They could keep their distance and restrain their inner secrets so that they wouldn't be sucked away. The difference between this place and the outside universe was that it wasn't the cultivator's body that was attracted, but the energy in their body. One could choose not to come, but if one came, they would have to bear with it. Inside the wall of mirrors, the spiritual treasures were an exception, especially the innate spiritual treasures. They were the only species in the universe that could rely on themselves to resist this kind of suction. That was why there was still the empty divine magic conch and the flickering lamp. That was why they were the fulcrum of the entire coordinate system of the wall of mirrors. That was why they were so important, and all the cultivators who came here carefully guarded them. That was why the Leap 8 Heavens cauldron came here to hide. The universe was vast, and there were countless dangerous places. It had also traveled to many places with immortal Wu Hua, but in terms of safety, this place was blessed by the heavens. No matter who came here, they couldn't fight a protracted battle with it. This was an instinctive choice, a self-defense mechanism when the innate spiritual treasure first gained intelligence. The suction force here was the strongest, and the resentment spiritual bodies were the densest here. This kind of environment was a natural barrier for it to protect itself. It was a very smart choice. The bamboo hat cautiously circled around the black hole a few times. Compared to the Leap 8 Heavens cauldron, this thing posed a greater threat to him. He had to actually feel the suction force here to determine how long he could stay here. Only then could he determine his plan of action. Soon, he made a judgment in his heart. 2 years was a relatively safe limit, and 3 years was the limit. He had to leave. When he had a plan in mind, he refocused his attention on the Leap 8 Heavens cauldron floating outside the black hole like an inanimate object. The Leap 8 Heavens cauldron floated here for 2 reasons. First, it was safe, and second, it nurtured a spirit. Although its lifespan was very long, it was under the control of humans for a long period of time. For spiritual treasures, whether they were innate or acquired, the most important factor for humans to measure them was the time they gained intelligence. If they gained intelligence early, then they would definitely be a powerful spiritual treasure. If they gained intelligence late, then they would instinctively control their behavior, and there would be countless possibilities. The Leap 8 Heavens cauldron was more complicated. It gained intelligence very late, only a few decades ago. For existences like them, it was no different from being born. But because he also had a long experience of mingling with immortals, it was very difficult to accurately measure their abilities. It was full of uncertainty. The bamboo hat already had a plan on how to deal with this pre-celestial spiritual treasure. From the moment he received this mission, he knew that using brute force would definitely not work. However, he could do something through that bit of karma with the immortal Wu Hua, moistening things silently and imperceptibly. But his imperceptibility could only last for 2 or 3 years. Chapter 1995. The Leap 8 Heavens cauldron was formed during the period of the 5 Grandmasters. This was the immemorial era before the chaos was formed. Immortal Elder Wu Hua chose it as his accompanying immortal cauldron in the end. It was not a random choice. It was a coincidence, but it was also inevitable. The most important thing was that it was perfectly compatible with the Tao realm. Even Immortal Elder Wu Hua's Great Tao, the Leap Earth Great Tao, was formed from this cauldron. It could be seen that it played an important role in Immortal Elder Wu Hua's path to immortality. After Immortal Elder Wu Hua died, this heaven cauldron naturally could not be buried with him. It finally got rid of Immortal Elder Wu Hua's control, gave birth to its own consciousness, and hid here. It was very difficult to determine its current level just by looking at its realm. Of course, it was definitely not an immortal cauldron. The immortal world would not allow an immortal's immortal lattice to be replaced by something close to him after his death. However, it would not fall too low. After all, this was something immortals used to rely on. It was very difficult to determine how to identify it. Did this Leap 8 Heavens cauldron have more intelligence? Or was it the hidden consciousness of Immortal Elder Wu Hua? This would take a long time, so long that even a human half-immortal might not be able to outlast it. Bamboo Hat naturally would not choose such a stupid method. The task of the heavenly eyes was unclear. What he wanted to do was to think of the worst-case scenario. Therefore, killing it was actually the most rational thing to do. The least he could do was to not leave any future troubles, and also cut off the karma that might affect his future upper realm. Keeping this thing would be troublesome in the end. How could one completely destroy a connate numinous treasure? At their level, it was no longer physical destruction. Cleaving it in two or hammering it into pieces was meaningless. It was impossible to cause any real damage to a connate numinous treasure. If he wanted to truly destroy the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron, he had to start with the Leap Earth Great Tao on the basis of Tao Realm. He had to completely deny its existence as the cornerstone of the Leap Earth Great Tao. This was the way humans fought with innate spiritual treasures of the same level. On the surface, it was very peaceful, but the danger was not inferior to a life and death battle between humans. Bamboo Hat was very clear about this point, so he would not try it in vain. He would use other methods to test it. If he did not succeed, the thousands of resentful spirits here would swallow him alive. He slowly came to the side of the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. However, the connate numinous treasure seemed to have sensed nothing and remained dead silent. There was no need for it to react in any way. The tens of thousands of vengeful spirits here were its guards, and the black hole's energy extraction was its helper. What else did it need to do? The Bamboo Hat calmed his mind and slowly extended his consciousness into the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. Following the changes in the Tao state within the Heaven Cauldron, he changed his own Tao state response. Among the 5 grands, he was searching for that mysterious connection. Time passed slowly, and the changes in the Bamboo Hat's consciousness and Tao realm slowly began to synchronize with the changes in the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. At first, it was a little deliberate and lagged behind, but after a while, it quietly reached a wonderful resonance point. The Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron still didn't change, but the man in the hat started to become illusory. In the end, he disappeared. It was as if he had never existed. This was an ability of a second severance cultivator. They could transform into a being of the Tao tier and abandon their mortal body. The greatest significance of doing this was that they could use their Tao tier ability to the greatest extent and did not need to transmit their Tao tier through some kind of move like ordinary half-immortals. There were many benefits, and this was manifested here. It would not trigger the restlessness of the countless vengeful spirits in the surroundings. No matter what he did, it would be inside the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron, and he would avoid the greatest embarrassment of being a human cultivator, being attacked by spirits. The most important benefit was that he could cleverly avoid encountering that partner of his who was on the same mission as him. Towards Lu Xiaoyi, he had always been very unsure. He seemed very fierce, but also seemed to know how to rope people in. Which was the real him? Only by coming into contact with him would he know. Regrettably, they had heard of each other for a long time, but had never really come into contact with each other, and had even become great enemies in this kind of situation where they had never come into contact with each other. Now that he had transformed into a Tao tier cultivator and was hiding inside the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron, he had a chance to observe this person's way of doing things from a close distance. His true cultivation level of Tao tier. With this as the basis, he would then decide what to do. They could join forces, they could pretend to be ignorant, they could be strangers, and they could also make a move in secret. He would not come up with a plan in advance. Everything would be decided on the spot, and that was the most brilliant strategy. Of course, there would be losses for every gain. The greatest harm of merging his body into the Tao tier was that if he lost this contest of Tao tier, his whole person would become nourishment for the Tao tier and be absorbed by the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. There were also some minor problems. For example, he would lose his sight, ears, body, tongue, and nose. Using the extreme divine sense Tao tier to replace the other 5 senses of the 6 senses, there would be losses for every gain. This was the rule of any kind of Tao technique. This kind of method could be said to be fighting to live from the brink of death, but as an outstanding half-immortal freak, he had this kind of confidence and would not avoid this kind of danger. He was the Bamboo Hat, the person chosen by the heavenly Tao to maintain the old order. In this kind of Tao tier state, he appeared to be very at ease, advancing and retreating as he pleased. He was not in a hurry to deal with this Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron, even if he actually already had some confidence. If he could use this innate spiritual treasure to achieve other additional goals, wouldn't it be wonderful? Time passed quietly in this kind of waiting. Around the black hole, everything was as usual. The Leap 8 Heavens cauldron was still lifeless, and countless resentful spiritual bodies were like dense seaweed in the shallow sea. The energy from the entire wall of mirrors was still steadily converging towards the black hole, just like the rhythm of millions of years. A year later, the bamboo had sensed an indescribable aura approaching and knew that it was coming. He could not help but hide his Tao-tier fluctuations even more, as if it was a part of the Leap 8 Heavens cauldron's own Tao-tier circulation. This kind of invisibility technique was indeed very high-end. As long as the Leap 8 Heavens cauldron was there, no one would be able to detect that there was a human here. It did not matter if one was looking, smelling, or touching. As long as the bamboo hat did not use his Tao-tier control, he would be invisible. It was a very strange feeling. It was indeed an unfamiliar aura approaching, but it gave the bamboo hat a strange feeling, as if it was not a human. He had never come into contact with Lu Xiaoyi, so he was not clear about the characteristics of this person's aura. However, from a conventional point of view, swordsman, sharp, aggressive, that was more or less the case. Lu Xiaoyi was very special, but some essential things would not change. However, in his Tao-tier perception, he did not feel the aura of a swordsman. This was very abnormal. However, he did not lie. He would not take the initiative to strengthen his Tao-tier perception, because that would expose himself. Instead, he let nature take its course and waited for this inexplicable thing to approach. One fact was that when Lu Cheng stirred shit up, you would never be able to figure out how he did it. Was it to the side? Was it to the bottom? The universe was as vast as a circle, and there was a rod in the middle. Spinning in the right direction was to beat the starch, and spinning in the wrong direction was to stir the starch. Chapter 1996. When it approached a certain distance, the bamboo hat used his Tao realm perception to discover that it was another connate numinous treasure that was approaching him. Of course, he could only sense it with his Tao realm. Since he no longer had a body, he no longer had eyes, nose, tongue, and ears. Before entering the wall of reflection, he was not completely clueless about the situation in the mirror realm. This was a necessary precaution for a half-immortal cultivator. For example, the situation of the inner and outer scenic heaven half-immortals, their range of activities, the nature of their missions. Of course, he also knew the coordinates of the mirror realm. He also knew the two most important points in this coordinate system, the two connate spiritual treasures. Empty divine magic conch and light extinguishing lamp seemed to be these two names. The one that came should be the empty divine magic conch. The bamboo hat knew a little about how spiritual treasures interacted with each other. As the saying goes, a mountain cannot have two tigers unless one is male and the other is female. In the universe, this rule also existed. For spiritual treasures, it was standard for a connate spiritual treasure to guard a universe. There might be multiple universes with one connate spiritual treasure, but there had never been multiple connate spiritual treasures in a universe. Taisu, Heaven and Earth Chessboard, Ruins of End, Tao Wu, Big Tree, and so on were all like this. Of course, this was for connate spiritual treasures. Artificial spiritual treasures were not included. In the cultivation world, it was common knowledge that a universe could only have one connate spiritual treasure. Of course, this referred to those connate spiritual treasures that had gained sentience. Chaotic spiritual treasures were not included. The mirror realm could also be seen as a universe. Therefore, there should only be one connate spiritual treasure that had gained sentience. That was why the Leap 8 Heavens cauldron came here. It ignored the other two connate spiritual treasures that had not gained sentience. But the problem now was, what if the two connate spiritual treasures in the mirror realm had gained sentience by coincidence? Who should have the right to guard this mirror realm? Were they the ones who stayed here longer? Or should they have a stronger background? Or should they be stronger? There was no uniform rule. If they were all under the Heavenly Eye system, Lord Numinous Treasure would come out to mediate. But if they were all spiritual treasures that were not part of the system, this was the bamboo hat's guess of the entire process. It had to be said that it was too coincidental. The Leap 8 Heavens cauldron gained sentience came here, And then one of the two connate spiritual treasures in the mirror realm had gained sentience? Could there be humans secretly meddling in this? What was his goal? Did he have anything to do with the swordsman? This was the crux of the problem. He wasn't sure, so he could only observe quietly. While observing, he would find an opportunity to see if he could find out the truth. The timing was also very coincidental. According to his calculations, the swordsman wouldn't have been too slow after receiving the omniscient eye quest. He definitely wouldn't have arrived as soon as he did, because he would have to choose one out of 3 options. It would be normal for him to arrive 1 or 2 years later than him. For example, the timing of the arrival of the Empyrean spirited conch. Personally, he was more inclined to believe that the swordsman was behind this. However, because he no longer had 5 of his 6 senses, he could only rely on his Tao realm to distinguish everything. He no longer had the most direct method, using his eyes. Everything seemed a little confusing. This was the joy of cultivation. When you thought you had the best response, what appeared in front of you was often the most embarrassing shortcoming. At least until now, the appearance was that the two connate spiritual treasures were fighting for supremacy in this void. One was more active, while the other was more passive. In essence, it was a question of who would stay and who would leave. Perhaps the two connate spiritual treasures were controlled by humans, but they were trying their best to pretend that they were pure spiritual treasures. Therefore, the battle between them could only be carried out in the way that the spiritual treasures were most used to. Firstly, the spiritual treasures wouldn't curse at each other. Therefore, no one spoke, and there was no communication. The spiritual treasures wouldn't bargain with each other either. Most of the time, the stronger one would stay, and the weaker one would leave. Just like now, when the Empyrean spirited conch approached, it didn't have the habits of a human cultivator. For example, it observed from afar, probed, and said a few meaningless words to test each other's strengths. It wanted to see if there were any similarities between the two Tao teachings, and if there were any connections between them. This was a problem of humans, not connate spiritual treasures. At least for now, it seemed like the spiritual treasure was coming. The spirited conch approached directly. 4 connate spiritual treasures of their level. If there was a battle, the distance between the Tao realms would be very far. However, in an environment like the Wall of Mirrors, the collision of the Tao realms would definitely cause chaos among the countless resentful spirits. To the spiritual treasures, this went against the foundation of their existence. Therefore, they chose to fight in close proximity. This was the nature of the spiritual treasures. At the very least, the people controlling the two spiritual treasures weren't amateurs. Their acting was very convincing. In this seemingly calm atmosphere, the two connate spiritual treasures collided. The mouth of the Empyrean spirited conch wrapped tightly around the tip of the Leap 8 Heavens cauldron. The two spiritual treasures merged into one. In an instant, the Tao realms wreaked havoc, fighting back and forth, going straight for the main point. The bamboo hat still hid itself in the Tao realm. All the responses were controlled by the Leap 8 Heavens cauldron's instincts. He only sensed silently, but didn't make a move. Although the Leap 8 Heavens cauldron had always appeared lifeless, that was only to nurture a spirit. When an existence that was similarly a natural spiritual treasure challenged it, its instincts would not allow it to back down. A counterattack was inevitable. It was a fusion spiritual treasure of the 5 grand Tao realms. The transformation of the Tao realms was naturally based on the 5 grand Tao realms. In the process of the dispute, the true essence of the universe's transformation in the primordial age was fully displayed. The Empyrean spirited conch didn't come later than it in terms of lifespan. As a connate spiritual treasure, they were brothers of the same generation. However, the difference was that the spirited conch's Tao realm wasn't the 5 grand Tao realms, but the origin. The origin wasn't within the 5 grand Tao realms, but it was closely related to the 5 grand Tao realms. They supported each other's transformation. In fact, in the end, it was just a competition to see how profound the evolution of their respective realms were. This kind of competition was a typical literary competition. It was also the default way connate spiritual treasures compared with each other. It wasn't like between humans, where the goal was to kill each other. Up until now, The two spiritual treasures had performed well, perfectly interpreting the philosophy of the spiritual treasure race. Tao came first, and competition came second. The prerequisite for such a competition was that both sides wouldn't go down a dead end. The universe was very big, and there were too many universes that could exist in. Why should they fight to the death over a piece of territory? It was because of this that the bamboo hat allowed the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron to act alone. In his opinion, with immortal Wu Hua's long teachings, how could the connate spiritual treasures of the main world compare to it in terms of Tao realm? If the spirited conch retreated in the end, then it would be a coincidence. If it didn't retreat after being defeated, then it must be the swordsman's doing. Chapter 1997. The bamboo hat was very thoughtful, but after some time, he found that his idea was too simple. The Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron's Leap Earth Great Way was indeed profound, but the problem was that its foundation no longer existed. Wu Tai had already collapsed, and even immortal Wu Hua had died. It was obvious that there was a problem with his Leap Earth Great Way. In other words, there was no problem in the past, but now, because the change of the era was imminent, it did not conform to the situation. The problem was that the origin had not collapsed yet. The bamboo hat noticed that from the beginning, the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron's Leap Earth Great Way had the absolute advantage, but the empty divine magic conch was very tenacious and did not admit defeat easily. In the stalemate, it relied on the origin's Great Way to regain the balance bit by bit. In view of the fact that the two innate spiritual treasures had just gained intelligence, their application in the Tao realm still needed a process from unfamiliar to familiar. This was a very normal phenomenon. The instinct of the Tao realm was the cornerstone of every innate spiritual treasure. It would not be forgotten or discarded, and it would not be confused because of the birth of intelligence. However, the so-called intelligence lay in the flexible application of the Tao realm, in deducing other things from one case, in comprehending other things by analogy, in learning from small details, and in learning from small details, turning the instinct into a realm that could be improved through learning. This was the real meaning of the birth of intelligence. It was the prerequisite for the innate spiritual treasures to advance further. It was not to repeat the imprints left by the universe because of their long lives, to turn the dead Tao realm into a living Tao realm. This was intelligence. Intelligence was also divided into different levels. Just like human beings, some were born smart and some were stupid. The former was the internal decisive factor of the innate spiritual treasure strength. At least for now, the empty divine magic conch was obviously stronger than the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. The bamboo hat knew very well why such a situation happened. It was not because the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron was born smarter than the empty divine magic conch, but because it was an innate spiritual treasure that had been affected by the outside world during its natural evolution. If the empty divine magic conch had developed intelligence naturally, its intelligence would definitely not be low. Because the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron had been controlled by immortal Wu Hua for millions of years, its intelligence would definitely not be high. Moreover, since heavens, I suspected that the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron still had the remnant consciousness of immortal Wu Hua, then there must be a reason for this. Its intelligence was not high to begin with, and the consciousness of immortal Wu Hua might be mixed in with it. So it was normal for it to be weaker than a native awakened spiritual treasure like the empty divine magic conch. In this regard, ordinary people believed that immortal items were definitely stronger than other items of the same type. This kind of concept was wrong, at least not comprehensive. He still didn't move. Not participating. He wouldn't easily make a move. Because this was the only way to force out the dormant consciousness of immortal Wu Hua from the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. Only then would he be able to find out if there was really someone behind this suspicious empty god magic conch. If his guesses were correct, the final battle would be between the swordsman and immortal Wu Hua. That would be the perfect outcome. When the sandpiper and the clam fight, the fisherman benefits. The strategy was very old, but sometimes, the older the strategy, the more feasible it was because it had withstood the test of time. This was the meaning of waiting. Lu Xiaoyi focused on using the Tao realm because he was still a primary school student who had just entered the primordial chaos realm. What the bamboo hat didn't know was that he relied heavily on the innate Tao fragments in his study of Tao, because he didn't have the talent of comprehending Tao like the bamboo hat. But without the heavenly Tao's favor and giving him the ability to comprehend Tao fragments, his study was the most normal study, but with the enhancement of the small universe in his body, he had the ability to capture Tao fragments and some other messy things. The bamboo hat guessed that his innate ability should have come from the conservative power of the three graces, and the swordsman's ability might have come from Hong Mao. This wasn't a blind guess. There was the Sword Tao tablet in the inverse space Heaven's Choice continent, and there were traces of Li Wuya. It was normal for Hong Mao, who longed for change, to take a fancy to him. Otherwise, how could a human cultivator have such an abnormal ability to comprehend Tao without the enhancement of a mighty power? It was very difficult for others to master 1 or 2 Taos, but they had mastered at least 10? This guess was very reasonable, but it didn't conform to reality. At the very least, it seemed that Hong Mao didn't take a fancy to Lu Xiaoyi. He was a person who used the most ordinary method to comprehend Tao. The only thing he was strong about was his learning ability, and his learning method was excellent. Therefore, in the primordial chaos Tao realm, he was a beginner who was improving to a higher level. It was just that his improvement was very fast. This was very suitable for an innate spiritual treasure that had just gained sentience. This was also what Lu Xiaoyi was pursuing. During his discussion with Ding Shan, the Old's Blight had given him a lot of help. When it knew that he might go to find trouble with the newly appeared innate spiritual treasure, it gave him such a suggestion. Hiding in the empty divine conch and using the appearance of the innate spiritual treasure to approach it had many benefits. The biggest benefit was that it could avoid the harassment of the resentful spirit bodies. The number of spirit bodies entrenched in the black hole in the depths of the reflection wall wasn't the same as before. There were hundreds of thousands of them, and they weren't something a human cultivator could fight against. Ding Shan's suggestion was very pertinent, especially to Lu Xiaoyi. He still had an enemy who was his companion. He was a very difficult person to deal with. Second Severance primordial spirit, and his cultivation level was above his. It wasn't that he was afraid of this guy, but with this bamboo hat's behavior, he avoided him in everything, and probably wouldn't give him a fair chance to fight. This person's Tao heart was very different. He didn't feel ashamed of retreating, and his vision was very far. He was a good opponent who could submit and stand tall. This kind of person, it was very difficult for him to use his full strength, and it was also very difficult for him to succeed with a single strike after advancing 2 steps in cultivation level. So he needed a strategy. Ding Shan meant that he could use the fake first, and let Lu Xiaoyi take the conch to complete the mission. In any case, he couldn't leave before the mission was completed, so there was no need to collect it now. To him, he wouldn't consider the swordsman taking the treasure and not returning either. This wasn't the style of a swordsman. This was the reason why Lu Xiaoyi had flown all the way here and entered the conch not far from the black hole and quietly approached it. This kind of method of his actually had a loophole. If the opponent still had all 6 senses, he wouldn't be able to hide it for too long. But the problem was now that the bamboo hat only had 1 sense left. Lu Xiaoyi was also very puzzled. He had only seen the Leap 8 Heaven's Cauldron, but where had the man in the bamboo hat gone? Had he come later than him and hadn't arrived yet? Or had he sensed that he was unusually close and then kept a respectful distance from him like before? It was very unlikely that he would get lost. This guy had karma with Celestial Elder Wu Hua, so it would be much easier for him to find the Leap 8 Heaven's Cauldron than it was for him. Thus, his best method was to still hide in the conch and pretend to be a natural spirit treasure that had developed spiritual sense to challenge the Leap 8 Heaven's Cauldron. There were also 2 advantages. He could see if the Leap 8 Heaven's Cauldron really had the remnant consciousness of Celestial Elder Wu Hua. Also, he thought that the bamboo hat might be lying in ambush somewhere. Chapter 1998. The battle at the black hole of the reflecting mirror proceeded in such a strange manner. Both sides were wary of each other. Actually, what they were truly worried about was not the other party. A second severance would not be worried about a first severance, and a swordsman would not be worried about a technique cultivator. What they were truly worried about was the possible remnant consciousness of deity Wu Hua. No one knew how much power the remnant consciousness of an immortal could unleash. There were too many influencing factors, which was the main reason why the two of them were acting so sneakily, just to force out the remnant soul of immortal Wu Hua. It wouldn't be appropriate for a human to appear rashly for this purpose, and it would be best for them to create the illusion that two spiritual treasures were fighting against each other. This was the choice made by the two apex half-fairies without prior consultation, because they knew very well that once the remnant soul awoke, they would definitely be exposed. What they wanted to capture was the moment the remnant soul awoke. The process was that the consciousness of the immortal elder's remnant soul had lost its perception of the outside world in a deep slumber. There was only one way to force it to wake up: the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. As long as the Wu Hua remnant soul woke up, the two half-immortals would immediately know the truth about Leap 8. Half of the Heaven's Eyes mission would be completed, and the next step would be to solve the problem. As for whether the remnant soul would discover them at this time, it was no longer important. In any case, they would enter the real battle. So what difference did it make whether they knew or not? With this goal in mind, whether it was Bamboo Hat, who came first, or Lu Xiaoyi, who came later, they were all very willing to see the Kongshan FA Conch board reverse its disadvantage and gradually gain the upper hand. The Bamboo Hat quietly watched this Dao realm battle between Khanate spirit treasures. He allowed the situation to slowly shift in the empty god spell Conch's favor. No matter which side won, he would achieve one of his goals. If the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron was defeated, the remnant soul of immortal Wu Hua would be forced out. Perhaps the swordsman was the one forced out after the empty god Conch was defeated, but in comparison, he actually hoped that Conch would fail more often than not. His intuition told him that this living first-step half-immortal was a much greater threat than the dead immortal Wu Hua. This process was very slow. When it came to the Dao realm, it wasn't as straightforward as a knife or spear. It was a slow process. He wanted to speed up the process. There was no other reason. As the incarnation of a Dao realm cultivator, he was the fastest to be sucked out by the black hole. Khanate numinous treasures were not afraid of being extracted. Humans couldn't do it, no matter what form they existed in, whether it was the normal physical form, the spiritual form, or his current Dao state form. Under the rules, no one was spared. His body was a precious artifact, so if he lost his body, he would lose it even faster. This was not beneficial to a protracted battle. The two Khanate numinous treasures did not need to be delayed for too long. In just a dozen years, he would have no choice but to scram on his own. But for a numinous treasure, wouldn't it be normal to fight for hundreds or thousands of years? Some of the older ones were tens of millions of years old. He had to add some ingredients to both sides of the spirit treasures. Otherwise, there would be no end to this. The Bamboo Hat had already made up his mind. He would not participate in the battle for the time being, but if he played a little trick, Lu Xiaoyi had similar worries. His energy was also being sucked out at any time in the empty divine magic conch. Under such a situation, he was not worried about the Bamboo Hat because as long as this guy was nearby, he would not be able to escape the black hole suction. Just like him, he would be weakened all the time. What he was worried about was the remnant soul of the immortal elder in the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. Once it appeared, would he still have the ability to control it? There was no time to confirm that there was indeed a remnant soul in the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron before running out of the reflection mirror to recover his cultivation. It would take more than 5 years. How could Leap 8 still stay here to be killed? He had to solve it on the spot after discovering it. He could only speed up the battle between the two Khanate numinous treasures. He couldn't do it himself. Now, controlling the empty divine magic conch to use the origin Dao realm was his limit. If he exerted more influence, it would expose the fact that the conch was controlled by a human. So, he had to find a third party to speed up. The reflection mirror was spacious. Where could there be a third party? Except for those endless resentment spiritual bodies. The two Khanate numinous treasures were facing each other, and the battle between them was controlled in the inner space of the Khanate numinous treasures. This space could be very big or very small. It was the space of the Khanate numinous treasures. Because they instinctively did not want to attract the attention of the resentment spiritual bodies outside, they were very careful in controlling their battle. However, the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron went from being suppressed to being balanced, and now began to show signs of weakening. Even the Connate Numinous Treasures were unwilling to accept such a result. They could accept being defeated by a human, but it was very difficult to accept being defeated by their own kind. It was a very strange mentality. When the mentality changed, the control of the Tao realm would also change. When the heart was not pure, the Tao realm would definitely be out of tune. In a sudden change in the 5 Grand Tao realm, the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron made such a mistake. Although it did not cause a sudden change in the situation, it accidentally caused a leak outside the Tao realm. If this leak was in the spacious void of the universe, it would not be a big deal. However, near the black hole, it immediately attracted the attention of countless resentment spiritual bodies. It was like throwing bait into a fishing pond, and all the fish swarmed over. What surrounded them was not only the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron, but also the empty divine magic conch. Once the Tao realm leaked, the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron's secret space opened, and then the secret space of the empty divine magic conch. Once this opening opened, it could no longer be closed, unless the spiritual bodies that had broken into the secret space were eliminated first. However, to eliminate them, one would have to divide the power of the Tao realm, which would put one in a disadvantageous position in the battle against the opponent's numinous treasures, a series of chain reactions. When an unexpected situation occurred, the difference between numinous treasures and humans became apparent. Human cultivators would instantly weigh the situation and quickly make the most appropriate response. However, numinous treasures were not. They had just developed spiritual intelligence and were inexperienced, so how could they be quick-witted? With a slight hesitation, the spiritual bodies, which did not have a physical body, rushed in very quickly and immediately occupied the secret space of the 2 numinous treasures. At this moment, the battle had already turned into several sides. The Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron, the empty divine magic conch, Lu Xiaoyi, the bamboo hat, the resentment spiritual bodies, and the remnant soul of an immortal that could awaken at any time. It seemed that the situation was becoming more and more complicated. Lu Xiaoyi was very vigilant. Because the mistake of the Moisten 8 Heavens Cauldron this time was very unusual. Although there was no problem in using the Tao realm, it seemed to be full of the cunning of humans. How could an innate numinous treasure that had just developed spiritual intelligence have such deep thoughts? He couldn't help but think of the worst, because in this world of deceit and deception, anything could happen. Chapter 1999. Once the resentment spiritual bodies joined the fray, the way of battle changed again. Because this was the inner space of the innate spiritual treasure, only the level of the Tao state could be compared here. It did not support the attacking methods of humans. Every resentment spirit body was a Blight Realm cultivator in their previous life. Regardless of their level, they were all proficient in the Tao realm. Furthermore, they were all varied and all-encompassing. But because they were just a bunch of stubbornness, the way they displayed their Tao states was very messy, incomplete, stubborn, and lacking in variety. The Tao state attack of a spiritual body was not surprising, but if there were tens of thousands of spiritual bodies causing trouble, it would become a messy battle. The balance was instantly disrupted. The first thing the 2 innate spiritual treasures had to deal with were these disregarding resentment spiritual bodies. If they ignored them, it was very likely that their Tao states would be fundamentally affected. The spiritual treasure's way of dealing with this was to break it down. By separating the resentment spiritual body's stubbornness from their Tao state abilities, they would erase their Tao state abilities. Only pure resentment would be left, and they would not be able to stir up trouble. This was a brilliant method of breaking it down. It was limited to the resentment spiritual bodies, which did not have a physical body to support them. The body was a treasure, while the energy was nothingness. Lu Xiaoyi could do this too, but he did not because it was too troublesome. However, the innate spiritual treasures adhered to the inherent characteristics of their race and did not want to be too involved in human disputes. Thus, they used this method. The resentment was still there, but the abilities were gone. Since it was not completely erased, it would not be involved. It was a little too careful, but this was the principle of the spiritual treasures. This principle ensured that even if their combat power was limited, they would still become an important part of the cultivation world. There was a reason for this. Lu Xiaoyi and the bamboo hat did not attack again. Instead, they shrank to the side and quietly observed the changes. It had to be admitted that they were innate spiritual treasures after all. They had their instincts, and it was only by relying on these instincts that the resentment spiritual bodies invaded the inner space of the spiritual treasures on a large scale for a period of time, that they slowly achieved a balance against the invaders. This was just the beginning. They would first block them, then balance them, and finally expel them. In the inner space of the spiritual treasures were the true masters. Their abilities could be unleashed to the greatest extent here. The entire decomposition process could barely be considered efficient, and they even had the time to compare notes with each other. As a large number of resentment spirits were destroyed here, their Tao realm abilities were assimilated and wiped out, leaving behind only endless resentment, pure resentment. Resentment was made up of two parts, the past and the future of a cultivator. A normal half-immortal should have a past, present, and future in a body. However, since the person had died, the present was obviously not there. Although the present was made up of two parts, the past was actually very thin and disorderly. It was impossible to identify it. The reason why they existed was because of the so-called resentment, or in other words, obsession. This was the reason why they were able to condense and not dissipate even after becoming spiritual energy. What obsession? Of course, it was the obsession to become an immortal. In other words, in the eyes of Lu Xiaoyi and the bamboo hat, what was floating in the secret space of the spiritual treasure were more and more pure future obsessions of the blight state. They were the future superego of every half-immortal. There were all kinds of strange things. Some had great ambitions, some had small ambitions, some had strange ambitions, and of course, there were also evil ambitions. In the situation where the Tao realm competition between the spiritual treasures was not intense, Lu Xiaoyi could not intervene. Naturally, he placed his attention on the future superego of these half-immortal great cultivators. If it was another time or another place, he would not have the opportunity to come into contact with so many examples. However, in this place, the examples were increasing under the attack of the spiritual treasures, gradually forming a large number of data. He was a person who was good at summarizing. At first, he was still in the mood of watching a show, but as he watched, his expression became serious. He found a certain pattern among them. These cultivators had sketched out their ambitions for the future, secretly following some kind of law. Ancient cultivation was a very important process for the past, present, and future. It was also the construction of one's past, present, and future that was often mentioned in the cultivation world. Cultivators in the Blight realm also had divine splits, but their divine splits of the past and future did not affect their achievement of Yang Spirit. As long as they split their divine splits, they could advance to Yang Spirit. However, if they wanted to hide their past and future, they still needed to split their divine splits of the past and future. Among them, the so-called divine splits of the past and future was a great ambition to build one's future. Did you want to build a Daluo golden immortal, a golden immortal, a genuine immortal, or a human immortal? It all depended on the personal ambition of the cultivator, or whether they were willing to spend a lot of time on the construction of the divine splits of the past and future. By observing these resentful spirit bodies, Lu Xiaoyi could clearly see what great ambition these dead cultivators had in the beginning. And how did he construct his future target ability? In fact, he understood that the construction of the past and future of these resentful spirit bodies was meaningless, because everyone's past was different. However, if he understood the dream of the future, then all cultivators had something in common. This came from the yearning in everyone's heart for the immortal realm. Lu Xiaoyi discovered a secret. It was a secret that he would never have discovered if he had not come to such a dead space, if he had not fallen to such a state, if he had not observed and dissected the resentful spirit bodies. This was an inference based on large amounts of data, because no one could read a large amount of other people's divine splits. This thing was hidden in everyone's mind, and was unique, and would never be mentioned to others. The divine splits of the past and future was a cultivator's great ambition. It was a comprehensive plan used to describe the height one wanted to reach in the future. It included many aspects, and one of the most important aspects was the rationality of one's ability. For example, if one's great ambition was to become a Daluo Golden Immortal, then the words Daluo Golden Immortal alone could not represent everything. A framework had to be built, a framework that could accommodate all the abilities one would possess after becoming an immortal. When one truly became an immortal, one's abilities would fluctuate within the limits of this framework. This was a divine splits that relied purely on one's imagination. It was a divine splits of the system of abilities. It was a system structure that had to be reviewed by the heavenly axiom and tacitly approved by the heavenly axiom. In reality, cultivators were often very ambitious. They were always a little whimsical when it came to the construction of their divine splits. It was unrealistic. Simply put, they were indulging in fantasy and wanted to swallow a fatty in one gulp. Even a great ambition had a limit. If one's great ambition was to reshape the universe, replace the heavenly axiom, and destroy the world, then such an unreliable ambition would naturally not be approved by the heavenly axiom. Naturally, one would never have the opportunity to become an immortal. Chapter 2000. Generally speaking, in the cultivation world of the universe, there were very few cultivators who did not know their limits. Self-knowledge was a necessary quality. Most of the cultivators still had a sense of propriety. They would control their ambitions within a reasonable range in order to achieve their ultimate goal of becoming an immortal. The difficulty was that in the cultivation world, there was no orthodoxy, inheritance, or ancient book that could describe the immortals, or even the framework of the Daluo Golden Immortal's abilities. There was no teaching of master and disciple, no writing, and no spreading to outsiders. These were the rules of the Four Saints' Heaven. In this way, the construction of the avatar of the superego was really diverse. Each had their own unique and wonderful ideas. Among them, there was no lack of whimsical and imaginative ideas. The construction of the avatar of the superego by most of these cultivators was destined to fail the inspection of the heavenly axiom. This was also the real reason why most of the half-immortals could never take the last step. From this point of view, the construction of the superego was far more important than Lu Xiaoyi had imagined. It was not as dispensable as he had originally thought. Whether it was a golden immortal or a true immortal, it was fine to just make a perfunctory routine. The past, the present, and the future were all equally important. He had reorganized his past in the odd righteous Pure Land. Now, he was starting to re-examine his future in the wall of mirrors. It was as if there was someone guiding him in the dark. Every cultivator, in the process of cultivation, would always have countless benefactors like this. They might not all have good intentions, but at the most appropriate time, they would push you to the most appropriate place. Fortune and misfortune came together. How could there be gains and losses? However, there was one thing. The re-examination of the past and the future had given him a more solid foundation. The construction of the past self was a process of constantly affirming oneself. If one did not even acknowledge their own past, how could there be a cultivation future to speak of? The construction of the present self was a process of correctly understanding oneself. It was a process of not boasting and not feeling inferior. Only when a cultivator understood himself could he understand the world. Both of these were the foundation. They were both laying a foundation and burying a stake. However, how high a cultivator's future achievement was, in fact, depended on the superego in the future. How high should he position himself so that he would have a wide space to prove himself without sacrificing his potential? A simple analogy was like building a building. Your past couldn't be changed now, and it was already set in stone. It was like the pile had been laid, and the foundation had been built. Then, according to the depth of a cultivator's foundation, the strength, the load-bearing capacity of the ground, and other factors, the heavenly Tao would automatically default to a height that one could reach after becoming an immortal. For example, Lu Xiaoyi. With the firmness of his foundation, the way of heaven might tacitly agree that he would be at the height of a human immortal after building the 10th floor of the building. At the 30th floor, he would be at the height of a true immortal. At the 60th floor, he would be at the height of a golden immortal. At the 100th floor, he would be at the height of a golden immortal. Therefore, he had to make a grand wish. If he made the wish to be a Daluo golden immortal, then his spirit separation of superego structure could not exceed 100 levels. If it exceeded that, then it would be a waste of the wish. The person himself would not know it, but he would never be able to take that step because his grand wish did not match his foundation. By analogy, if he made a grand wish to be a golden immortal, then his spirit separation of superego structure could not exceed 60 levels. If he made a true immortal wish, his structure could not exceed 30 levels. If he made a mortal immortal wish, his structure could not exceed 10 levels. No one would teach you all these things, and no one would be able to teach you. It was all up to you to figure it out. Those who felt good about themselves and made their grand wishes incomparably lofty were cutting off their own path to Tao. Those who were too cautious, careful, and did not dare to take a step beyond the minefield, and suppressed their grand wishes too low were purely limiting their ability after becoming a celestial. If there were two half-immortals who made a wish to be a Daluo golden immortal, according to their respective foundations, they could build a 100-floor building. One of them would aim to build a 90-floor building, while the other would prudently build a 70-floor building. Then, when they finally stepped into the ranks of Daluo sword immortals, the former's ability and potential would be much higher than the latter's, and he would be able to beat the latter. This was the evil consequence of making a grand wish to be a greater immortal. For a cultivator to become a celestial, taking the crucial step to become a celestial from a mortal was an extremely complicated and systematic project. Many people here emphasized on the so-called perception, fate, general trend, and other illusory things. In fact, it was the feeling of being weak and unable to control one's own body. Among them, most cultivators could perfectly achieve the ego and ego. The key was that countless cultivators were stuck in the structure of the greater immortal. There were not many cultivators who truly understood this principle. Half-immortals usually paid more attention to their own present and past. They believed that the future was illusory and vague, so why would they waste a huge amount of effort to do such a useless thing? Therefore, they did not know where they went wrong. They could only attribute it to fate. In fact, it was just an excuse that did not seek to understand. However, these talented cultivators could not be blamed for this, because they would never be able to compare the difference between two people's grand wishes. Among the secrets of a cultivator, regardless of whether it was the ego, or greater immortal, they were all the most secretive things of a cultivator. Moreover, it was impossible to express it through words. It was simply incomparable. Therefore, after millions of years in the world of cultivation, the cultivators were still groping about on their own without any experience or precedence. It was under such circumstances that Liu Xiaoyi obtained the data regarding the construction of the future superego by chance. When the data accumulated to a certain extent, the pattern within it would naturally surface. None of these secrets had ever been passed down to the mortal world. Whether it was the Xinyuan sword sect, the Three Pure Ones, the Supreme Exquisite Joseon Heaven's Choice, or any of the orthodoxies that Liu Xiaoyi had come into contact with, including those who were close to him, including the Crow ancestor and the sword Dao steel, and so on. This could only mean one thing. When one truly understood the truth, one could only reflect on it in one's heart and could not share it with others through any means. Just like him now. The construction of the superego not only determined the threshold for a cultivator to become an immortal, it also determined the height that a cultivator could reach in the future. Simply put, a cultivator must not exceed the height that their foundation determined in the future. They must try their best to open up the space of their own abilities. If one had the ability to build a 100-story building, then if one wished to reach the 99th story, that would be the maximum limit of one's own potential. This was the world of cultivation. There was no room for mistakes. One could only approach the correct answer through continuous testing, resentment, and obsession. They could forget everything, but they could not forget their own desire for the dream in their heart. The idea of the future superego in their heart was the biggest cornerstone of their existence. Chapter 2001. Liu Xiaoyi found a trace of regularity in such a large amount of data. This regularity, in the language of the cultivation world, was called fate. To Liu Xiaoyi, fate could sometimes be explained by precise big data calculations. Maybe not all of it, but it could certainly explain a part of it. Because it was all the resentment of the cultivators in the blight state, Liu Xiaoyi had a slight understanding of the process of becoming immortal in the exterior realm, or rather, how the man immortal behind the Jade Booklet influenced the cultivators to take the final step through the Jade Booklet to a certain extent. The unspeakable place was formed millions of years ago. Among the spiritual bodies of resentment floating in the dead silent space, some were formed millions of years ago when there was no exterior realm, and some came to the dead silent space after the appearance of the exterior realm. From the number of observations, the former was slightly more. After cultivating for more than 2,000 years, he had only heard of it and vaguely guessed it. This was the first time he faintly glimpsed the treasures of those man-immortals. It was also the first time he truly began to understand what was the real control of the heavenly way, and what was the selfish behavior of some people who used the heavenly way as a pretense. The high and mighty heavenly Tao should be controlling the quantity and quality of immortal ascension through the uncertainty of a cultivator's perception of the future. All those who had big eyes and small bellies, those who were arrogant, those who were unrealistic, and those who did not know their own limits would be stopped outside this barrier. Even until death, they would not understand why they could not take that last step even though they had worked hard to cultivate, had a solid foundation, and worked hard to cultivate. When the half-immortals came to the exterior realm, the man-immortals could avoid the inspection of the heavenly way through the Jade Booklet. To a certain extent, it provided convenience for certain groups of cultivators to cheat. The specific implementation tool was the wordless heavenly steel. Liu Xiaoyi had passed by the wordless heavenly steel once, when he was an enforcer of the exterior realm. Out of curiosity, he had also gone in to demonstrate, but he did not gain anything. It was not only him, but also the results of all the enforcers of the interior realm. He did not know whether it was targeted at the interior realm cultivators or for other reasons. However, these spiritual bodies of resentment were different. Most of them were first and second decay, so their understanding was still unclear. However, there were also some fourth and fifth decay cultivators who were proficient in this Tao. By analyzing their experience of the construction of superego and the final result, one could obtain certain things. Of course, this included the personal experience of many so-called orthodox Taoist cultivators. What they experienced in the wordless heavenly steel was different from what those unorthodox Buddhist sects experienced. To put it simply, the wordless heavenly steel could help a cultivator correct his or her future superego construction to a certain extent. It was equivalent to providing a vague template for a cultivator to correct his or her future superego construction. If a cultivator was smart enough, had good comprehension ability, and knew his or her limits, he or she would be able to understand something from it, and then change his or her own unrealistic superego construction. It was obvious that not every great cultivator would have such an opportunity. This opportunity was only given to those cultivators from certain orthodoxies, such as the Orthodox Taoist, the Orthodox Buddhist sects. In the words of the mortal world, this was a kind of back door. It was opened very discreetly, very carefully, and very strictly. It would not tell you anything clearly. If you had such qualifications but couldn't understand it, then you could only blame yourself for not having such luck. However, how could a cultivator who had reached the fifth decay be so slow? There were countless human immortals in the four sacred heavens of the immortal court. However, not every immortal of the orthodoxy had such an opportunity to support their orthodoxy. For example, the great Emperor Xinyuan might not be able to interfere in the exterior realm. He might not even know that there was such a loophole in the heavenly Tao's restriction on immortal ascension. The Crow ancestor, even if he was still alive, he would not care about such trivial actions. At least from the looks of it, The existence of this back door was only opened for the orthodox Taoists and Buddhists. This depended on the strength of the Taoists and Buddhists in the immortal court. It was useless to be envious. In cultivation, whether it was for an individual or an orthodoxy, it was all about strength. What made Lu Xiaoyi speechless was that ever since he became a demi-immortal, he had achieved a breakthrough in understanding the structure of the upper level in such a situation. He had relied on countless spiritual bodies, which were considered trash in the eyes of others, to wreak havoc in the main world, while he was in an inexplicable situation. He had such an experience, and so did the bamboo hat. Maybe the bamboo hat did not know what big data was, but his outstanding insight still allowed him to discover something. He sighed in his heart. Opportunities always come unexpectedly. They always catch people off guard. He had never thought that he could still get such a crucial warning in the future structure under such circumstances. Those resentful spiritual bodies did not seem so ugly and annoying anymore. They were all pitiful people. For the sake of his indelible dream, he understood a lot in his state of mind at this moment. This time, he went to the immortal Pastwachi Road and hoped for a new era. In a sense, his smooth sailing in the realm of Great Tao wasn't a good thing at all. Cultivators needed to go through ups and downs, and in this aspect, he was lacking a lot compared to the swordsman. He rarely experienced life and death situations, and he also did not have an all-powerful moment. However, he planned to completely step onto the stage of the universe's cultivation world after taking 2 steps forward. He would no longer keep a low profile, no longer endure. This way, he would not lose his momentum when fighting with the swordsman. However, at this moment, where was the swordsman? Was he nearby? Or was he waiting for an opportunity like him in the empty divine magic conch? At the very least, he had not found any clues yet. What a cunning fellow! The battle between the two innate spiritual treasures became more intense after the initial results of driving away the resentful spiritual bodies. They seemed to treat how to deal with the spiritual bodies as a part of the battle. Time had dragged on for a year. Originally, this kind of battle could have lasted for hundreds or thousands of years, but the addition of the resentful spiritual bodies sped up the battle. This was the plan of the 2 human half-immortals. They could not wait for hundreds of years, so they could only drag the resentful spiritual bodies into the battle, even if it might lead to additional risks. After a year of battle, the empty divine magic conch finally gained a stable advantage. The problem now was how to expand this advantage into victory. It did not have intelligence, and everything was based on instinct. It was controlled by someone and then stimulated here. Therefore, it was not very sensitive to victory or defeat. In other words, if it won, it would not know what to do. If it lost, it would not withdraw according to the rules of the spiritual treasures. Of course, with the control of a certain human hiding in its body, all of this was not a problem. Chapter 2002. Time slowly passed. The disadvantage of the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron became more and more obvious, and it became more and more difficult to support it. However, the remnant soul of immortal Wu Hua still didn't come out. 2 years had already passed. 2 years ago, the 2 wretched half-immortals still had time to learn something from the resentful spirit body. But now that they had finished comprehending, trouble came. Time seemed to be a little tight. Whether it was the bamboo hat or Lu Xiaoyi, their elemental energy reserves were now more than 70%, less than 80%. It sounded like a lot, but these reserves had to be used for the following battle, to deal with the remnant soul of immortal Wu Hua, to deal with each other, and to deal with the possible siege of the resentful spirit body. They also had to save some energy for the return journey, as well as the possible troubles during the return journey. They had to leave enough room for maneuver. This was the psychological quality that every cultivator must have. Under this premise, they had to take action and not continue to watch the fun. When the battle between the spiritual treasures would be decided, it would be decided by the spiritual treasure's own instincts. Although the 2 humans were residing in the spiritual treasures, they couldn't control the core instincts of the spiritual treasures. What they could do was to partially influence and speed up the process. This kind of participation was originally what they wanted to avoid, but as time passed, the situation changed. In order to not wait in vain, they had no choice but to withdraw. They could only take advantage of the little time they still had to exert some influence. The bamboo hat thought so, so he mixed in with the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron's Tao realm and sped up the rhythm of change, making the Tao realm between the two sides more intense and more dangerous. Lu Xiaoyi also thought so, so he began to take over the control of the empty divine magic Konk's Tao realm. He tried to be more aggressive without exposing any signs of human control. Otherwise, he couldn't force out the dormant remnant soul of the immortal. In the beginning, this kind of mutual attack was still messy and disorderly. It was something that the two spiritual treasures were more instinctive. But as time passed, the attack and defense became more and more familiar. There were also Tao realm tactics and hidden cunning. At this point, whether it was Lu Xiaoyi or the bamboo hat, they already understood the fact that the other party was hiding in it. Although they didn't know what method the other party used, it must be like this. This was the intuition of a half-immortal, from suspicion to certainty. In the end, no one could hide it from the other. Even though he knew, he still had to put on an act, especially when he was serious. Under the efforts of the two, the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron's decline expanded, but it was also because of this expansion that the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron's defense became even stronger after being shrunk to a certain range. On the other hand, the coverage of the empty divine magic conch took up most of the secret space inside the spirit treasure, which meant that it had to deal with more and more resentful spirits. As a result, it became harder and harder to expand the advantage. The resentment of the two human half-immortal realm cultivators, which they had lured into the spiritual body of resentment, had achieved its initial effect, but in the end, it had become an obstacle to the outcome of the battle. This was beyond their expectations. Time seemed to be running out, forcing the two half-immortals into a situation where they had no choice but to make a choice. Before this, the two of them had strictly followed the instructions of the Heavenly Eye. They had to first discover and distinguish the Heavenly Eye before making a decision. But now that he realized that it would take too long to distinguish, he had no choice but to consider another method: kill while distinguishing. He presupposed that the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron had the consciousness of the immortal's remnant soul, and during the process of erasing it, he would seek the truth. Just when the two of them were still weighing the pros and cons of doing this, the situation suddenly changed. The bamboo hat instantly lost its influence on the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron's Tao, and the divine magic conch controlled by Lu Xiaoyi was retreating. Under the sudden counterattack of the Leap Earth Great Tao, it had no room to fight back. The two of them were very smart. The bamboo hat hid and didn't move, while Lu Xiaoyi let nature take its course. He watched as the Leap Earth Great Tao suppressed the divine magic conch in a flash, and at the same time, wiped out all the resentful spirits that had invaded the spirit treasure space. The two of them actually didn't care about this result. They didn't care about which of the two innate spirit treasures would be able to suppress the other. What they cared about was when the immortal's remnant soul would come out. Now that the remnant soul had come out, it was the key to the problem. No one could use the Tao like this. This was an ability unique to immortals. Even if it was just a strand of remnant soul, the power of the Tao that it could exert was incomparable to that of a half-immortal. This was the hidden meaning of the two of them. If one wanted to find the remnant soul of an immortal, the best helper would be a resentful spirit body. Just like fireflies to lights, they were extremely curious about everything about the immortals. This was also their lifelong obsession. The moment the remnant soul of immortal Wu Hua appeared, it swept away these resentful spirits. It was because it didn't get tired of these spirits. After it was done, the spirit treasure's secret space was closed. Only then could there be a relatively quiet environment to settle some things. A deep and slightly tired consciousness came. Cultivating immortality in this life, even if I die, I won't be able to rest in peace. You two little friends are from the Heavenly Eyes, right? You're really haunting me. The bamboo hat no longer remained silent. Senior, I'm sorry. We can't go against the orders of our superiors. We have no choice. The consciousness was very clear. Well, little guy, you seem to have some karma with me. Is that why they sent you here? The bamboo hat didn't deny it. Thanks to Senior's immortal work, Junior has obtained something in the interior heavenly realm. I'm here to settle this karma. If Senior has any wishes, feel free to tell Junior. Junior will definitely not let you down. And then send me on my way? The consciousness laughed, but it wasn't angry or sad, because this was originally a part of the cultivation world. With millions of years of life, what couldn't it see through? They were just two lackeys who were ordered by others. He didn't even have the interest to resist. Even if he used his remaining understanding to eliminate these two juniors through the Leap 8 Heavens cauldron, what could he do? Would he be safe? Once he was targeted by the immortal court, unless he completely erased all traces of his existence in the universe, there would be endless troubles. He was just a remnant soul now. How could he resist? Of course, he was no stranger to the Heavenly Eyes. He knew that these two people from the Heavenly Eyes sect came to give him a message that the immortal court already knew of his existence. Next, he should just end it himself, so that everyone wouldn't lose face. The problem wasn't whether these two half-immortals could eliminate him. The problem was that he had no way to escape now, no trace to escape. In heaven and earth, there was no place for him to hide. This was a rule that existed since the beginning of the cultivation world. Wild geese leave traces, people leave no sound. Otherwise, the entire cultivation world would be dominated by a group of fixed existences sooner or later. There would never be a new power, and it would always be the same group of souls. The old wine would be replaced with a new bottle, and the old soup would be replaced with the same medicine. He understood all of this, but there was a breath that made him draw a trace of his real spirit into the Leap 8 Heavens cauldron when he died. He knew that doing so was useless. It was just to express the turbid breath in his heart. Chapter 2003. A remnant soul, as the name implied, was a soul that was incomplete, and fragmented. For low-realm cultivators, their remnant souls didn't have any rationality. Just like the countless resentful spirit bodies on the illuminating realm wall, they could also be considered a type of remnant soul. Remnant meant incomplete. The question was, which part was incomplete? Was it the thoughts? Was it understanding? Was it knowledge and experience? This point, from the expression of immortal Wu Hua's consciousness, couldn't be seen. His performance was very normal, as if he was a true immortal. His thoughts were clear, his reactions were sharp, and his grasp of the Tao realm was also very strong. Should an immortal's remnant soul be this strong? Why haven't you said anything? We were both sent by Heaven's Eye. He had karma with me because of the interior realm sky. What is your reason? Immortal Wu Hua's consciousness asked another ant. Lu Xiaoyi appeared very honest. Heaven's Eye has tens of millions of cultivators under its command. I am only one of them. You ask me why I came. I also don't know. He is the master. I am the supplement. My main task is to supervise and collect the corpse. Immortal Wu Hua was very curious. Supervise? Supervise what? What's there to supervise? Lu Xiaoyi said bitterly, if you reach some agreement, some exchange of benefits. Immortal Wu Hua said very wisely, you mean, you need a share? Lu Xiaoyi said confidently, of course. Immortal Wu Hua asked, then I want to know, what do you hope to obtain? Cultivation method? Secret technique? Resources? Or the secret to becoming an immortal? Lu Xiaoyi was bargaining with Immortal Wu Hua, while the bamboo hat was nervously searching for the hiding place of the immortal's consciousness. Because Lu Xiaoyi was suspicious, he was also suspicious. A remnant soul, what kind of nature did it have to have such a clear consciousness, clear memories of the past, quick thinking, and able to control the Tao realm so easily? What if it wasn't just a remnant soul, but a corpse? An evil corpse? A good corpse? This was what the bamboo hat was most worried about. Right now, he had transformed into a Tao realm and merged into the Leap 8 Heavens cauldron. This was the best place to find traces of it. He had to find it, destroy him. No matter how normal Immortal Wu Hua's consciousness appeared, it was like an old grandpa who had seen through cultivation. The more normal it was, the more terrifying it made him feel. He wondered if the swordsman felt the same way. However, He knew that the swordsman was still spouting nonsense at a time like this. There must be a reason behind this. He had to assume that the swordsman was as sharp as he was. Perhaps the two of them had their own thoughts before, but now they had to stand together because the immortal Wu Hua's remnant soul might be in the worst situation. Cultivation required one to have their own ideals. But before he stood up, he was very clear about where everything he had came from. Therefore, Heaven's Eye's mission must be carried out thoroughly. Moreover, because he was comprehending the Tao in the interior realm, he was involved with this immortal, so he had to separate them. If this was really a good corpse and an evil corpse, then it would definitely affect his future. At this moment, he sincerely hoped for the swordsman's support. Why are you doing this? Wouldn't it be better to end everything once and for all? Even if he stayed, it wouldn't change anything. It was a futile struggle. Leave quickly, so we won't have to worry. Immortal Wu Hua's consciousness was ancient. How could I not know this? But the change of an era is very precious to a cultivator. I want to see. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. This reason doesn't hold. People shouldn't look at a future that doesn't belong to them. Just like how mortals shouldn't think about seeing the end of this dynasty, whether or not their family will continue. Once you've seen it, you'll definitely start thinking about other things. Even if you don't think about it now, you'll definitely think about it in the future. Think about it first, then do it. Then, because of fulfilling your wish, countless people will wipe your ass for you. That's not appropriate. Immortal Wu Hua was displeased. Are you teaching me how to do things? Lu Xiaoyi remained calm. I'm just stating a fact. We've been here. We've left. That's it. We'll leave the future to the people in the future. Immortal Wu Hua sneered. Good idea. Good ambition. You're their favorite kind of Tao protector, right? Lu Xiaoyi's answer was very simple. I'll protect everything that's worth protecting. Whether it's the high and mighty heavenly Tao or the mortal world's human Tao, I won't protect for the sake of protecting, nor will I oppose for the sake of opposing. Immortal Wu Hua's words were shocking. Then, do you know that your so-called leaving the future to the people in the future is just an unrealistic fantasy? How many high and mighty immortals have done this before, or plan to do this in the future? The reason I was caught by you today is because my ability isn't enough to conceal the secrets of heaven. Little guy, you can confidently make a move against me, but that doesn't mean you're fair. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Senior, what I can do is only within the scope of my ability. You can't just take your little actions for granted because everyone is doing them and feel wronged. Moreover, it seems like you don't have any evidence. You're just making wild guesses and finding excuses for yourself. That's not good. Immortal Wu Hua's consciousness was somewhat helpless. He didn't expect these half-immortals in the lower realm to be so thoroughly brainwashed. Of course, it could also be a pretense. To him, even though he knew he couldn't do it, he still did it because he wanted to expose such a shocking scam. This wasn't because he was noble. When his immortal lattice was still there, he wouldn't do it. It was because he was also a member of this vested interest group. However, since the heavenly Tao had decided to give up on him, he would naturally choose to bite back. Once his Leap Earth Great Tao had a problem, he had already lost the ability to cause trouble in the lower realm while he was in the immortal court. All these years, he could only struggle bitterly in the immortal court to see if he could luckily come back from the dead. However, his efforts didn't succeed. In the immortal court where everyone was in danger, it was impossible for any immortal to help him, because it was very likely that they would invite trouble to themselves. He could only place his hopes in the lower realm on the traces left behind by the remnant soul after the death of an immortal. He knew that this would definitely not escape the attention of the immortal court, but at least there was a possibility of exposing some darkness. Hiding in the wall of mirrors, on one hand, was to avoid the eyes of the immortal court. This was indeed a very safe place. On the other hand, there were many half-immortals of the inner and western scenic sky here, which would help him spread some sensational news. In his judgment, the Heavenly Eye, who was in charge of carrying out the mission, would send a large number of inner and western scenic sky half-immortals who were carrying out the mission at the Wall of Mirrors to deal with him. However, He didn't expect that the heavenly I would only send 2 people over in the end, which made him a little disappointed. Moreover, he could see that these 2 people's willpower was very firm. They weren't people who would be swayed by hearsay. Chapter 2004. Evidence? Where would the immortals have evidence? If you wait until the evidence is conclusive before dealing with it, I'm afraid you won't even have a grave. But haven't you noticed one thing? Ever since the innate Taoists began to collapse, haven't there been too many cultivators who have attained the Tao? Too easy? Just like the 2 of you. The number of Tao realms you have comprehended is not few. Do you know how much time your predecessors spent just to master a single innate Tao? That was at least a few thousand years to start. How did it become so easy now? Lu Xiaoyi and the bamboo hat didn't say anything. To be honest, among the half-immortals, the 2 of them were the most abnormal in comprehending Tao realms. There were so many of them that it was a bit abnormal. Of course, they were also the ones who were the most affected. Especially the bamboo hat. He was very clear on how he was able to achieve omnipotence in the innate Tao. It really wasn't entirely his ability. Immortal Wu Huan knew that they were already suspicious. This was his goal. Perhaps because there were too few people, he might not be able to spread it. But at least this was a start, an attempt. He was very clear that there were many immortals who had the same thoughts as him. They were all the lower-level immortals of 4 sacred heavens. They wouldn't stand out now, but when the calamity truly befell them, they would definitely think of a way to do something. Before the era changed, the truth would be revealed to the entire cultivation world of the universe. Tao fragments spread throughout the universe. Those who are virtuous shall occupy them. Those who are fated shall obtain them. What is virtuous? What is fated? Do you think that doing a few more good deeds in your previous life is virtuous? That you are fated with the heavenly Tao? Hee. You guys are underestimating the immortals' understanding and control of the Tao. How could these Tao fragments really randomly fall into the mortal world, out of their control? The immortal elder's consciousness was somewhat agitated and angry. Although I can't explain it too thoroughly, I can responsibly say that the fragments of the great Tao that seem to be completely free actually have passive consciousnesses attached to them. They will choose, and approach those whose ideals are closest to them. The goal is self-evident. You guys can think about it yourselves. This is the most brilliant method. Even the heavenly Tao can't do anything about it. It's the same as leaving a way out for oneself after the era changes. It's just a pity that those of us who cultivate post-celestial Taoists don't have Tao fragments to disperse. If you want to leave behind some memories and make a comeback, you've violated the immortal Tao. Immortal Tao? Hee. Who wouldn't want to commit such a crime? Chongqing, after you've experienced it once, how could you not think of a way out for your own safety? The landlord of the mortal world even knows to dig a hole in his bedroom just in case. It doesn't make sense for him to be so generous after becoming a great immortal and not think about the future. He spoke very vaguely, but in fact, he was hinting at the golden immortal and the golden immortal. It meant that when the innate Taoists were crumbling, they had secretly attached their consciousness to the countless Tao fragments. This was not difficult on the technical level. After all, the ability of a gold immortal had completely broken through the normal range. His consciousness was so majestic that it was not difficult for him to split his thoughts into billions of thoughts. These consciousnesses were passively attached to the grand Tao fragments, and their function was to help identify the abilities and ideals of cultivators. Of course, most of them would fail. After all, cultivators that could catch the attention of golden immortals and golden immortals were truly rare. But there would definitely be cultivators with potential that satisfied their conditions. What Immortal Wu Hua meant was that after the cultivator fused with the grand Tao fragment, the golden immortal's consciousness would help the cultivator comprehend the true meaning of the grand Tao, imperceptibly and silently. When the cultivator completely grasped this innate Tao, the cultivator himself was actually not too sure whether he had grasped it or not. Or was it under the intentional guidance of the golden immortal's consciousness? Why did he do this? It was very confusing. If the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. If the golden immortals and golden immortals did this, Could you expect the true immortals and human immortals below to be obedient? That was naturally the 8 immortals showing their abilities. It was just that some did it safely and secretly, and some were limited by their abilities, just like Immortal Wu Hua. He was treated as a negative example. However, Lu Xiaoyi's interest was not on this. He was very clear about the process of his understanding of the innate Tao. To be honest, he had never truly fused with a Grand Tao fragment. It was not that he had foresight, but that these Grand Tao fragments could communicate with him, but none of them were willing to fuse with him. He did not know which part of the process went wrong. With his talent, he should not have received such treatment. It must be because the Grand Tao fragment had scruples. What scruples? What else could it be? The sword vein was a rat crossing the street that everyone wanted to beat. This also explained to a certain extent why he could understand the Grand Tao fragment on his own, but could not fuse with it. Because there was a force that was preventing this process. He thought it was a mystery, but in fact, the Golden Immortals were unwilling to let another monstrous freak appear in the sword vein. The more outstanding he was, the more he could not fuse with the Grand Tao fragment. This was because there was a wisp of the Golden Immortals will that no one could discover, which was the will of the former master of the Great Tao. Even if the Great Tao had collapsed, the Golden Immortals could still do this. This was something that Lu Xiaoyi had always been very curious about, but he did not expect the answer to be here. However, what he was concerned about was, Senior, what you said is a strange story of the immortal world that we will never hear. To be honest, we thought that the Great Tao had collapsed, but the Golden Immortals were still there. After all, who would be able to harm them and cause them to die? Immortal Wu Hua had come with the intention of spreading the news. The reason behind it was just that he was unable to resist and cause trouble, so he did not mind saying a few more words. You little guys, it's understandable that you don't know much about the changes in the upper realm. In fact, this is not a big secret. When the changes in the universe enter the middle and later stages, it can't be hidden from people. The innate Great Tao collapsed, and the master of the Great Tao, those Golden Immortals, naturally lost the foundation of their existence. What reason do they have to continue existing? Just like us. But the Golden Immortals are different in that the innate Great Tao will collapse and spread to the world, but the postnatal Great Tao of us ordinary immortals will not. The universe changes, the eras change. The immortal world naturally knows more than the mortal world, and has countless ways to pass the tribulation. Do you think that after living for millions of years, they will die in the end? So they can do it, but we can't. The Golden Immortals can spread the innate Great Tao to the world in order to seek a form of reincarnation in the future, which is something we can't do. So I say, the truth that you little guys think may not be the truth. So now, do you still insist on your so-called justice? The few of them fell into a short silence. These secrets from the immortal world, from the mouths of real immortals, were really shocking. It was challenging the bottom line of the 2 half-immortals. Chapter 2005. The bamboo hat tried his best to calm himself down, because everything that Immortal Wu Hua said was actually related to him. But the problem was that there were too many related things, and now he didn't know the real consequences. If he had only fused with one Great Tao fragment, he might be worried about whether he would become a tool for the Golden Immortal in the future, or even not be himself anymore. But his current problem was that he had fused with too many innate Great Taos, so he couldn't tell which Great Tao was the main one, and which was the supplement one. He kept reminding himself that he was different from others. In the process of understanding the various Tao realms, he was very clear about the source of his comprehension. He was the guardian of the heavenly Tao order, a different smoke and fire. The more dangerous the immortal's words were, the more he wanted to kill him, because this was challenging the order, and he, the bamboo hat, was the protector and inheritor of the existing order. This was his inevitable choice. On one side was the remnant soul of a has-been immortal, and on the other side were gods and Buddhas. This choice wasn't difficult. Moreover, Immortal Wu Hua wasn't a symbol of justice. As an immortal who hadn't fallen yet, doing this to remind the mortal world of cultivation was worthy of respect, just like Li Wuya from the sword vein back then. But immortal Wu Hua's current actions were obviously venting his anger after abandoning his vested interest group. Because he was chased off the boat, the mainstream abandoned him and didn't want to play with him anymore. He was just a profit-seeking person who didn't get any benefits, so he turned around and bit back. That was all. Based on this, if they did as he said, then they would be seeking their own deaths. It would be foolish beyond compare. He was worried about the swordsman. He was worried that this guy's personality couldn't tolerate such ugliness. A mere half-immortal couldn't tolerate the immortal court. This sounded ridiculous, but the Xinyuan swordsman could do it. Their sword ancestor was a classic example. Fortunately, the swordsman wasn't stupid. Lu Xiaoyi looked very apologetic. This is only your one-sided story. We can't verify it. I'm very sorry, even if all of this is true, we have to complete our mission. Otherwise, we won't even have the chance to verify your story in the future. Senior, you can't escape. Immortal Wu Hua was not surprised. Of course, he knew that no matter what he said, he could not change the fact that he was already a has-been. This was the crux of the problem. This old man has never thought of hiding. If I really wanted to deal with the two of you, I wouldn't even need to lift a finger. I just need to drag it out for a few more years. What can you do to me then? Immortal Wu Hua sighed in melancholy. You are suspecting whether my current existence is a good corpse or an evil corpse, right? In fact, how could the good and evil corpses represent the vastness of the ancient methods? My ancient technique originated from the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. It flourished when the cauldron was passed down through the cauldron to forge the fire. In the end, it also declined when the spirit was attached to the object. How could there be a distinction between good and evil? Before becoming an immortal, it was obsession. After becoming an immortal, it was kindness. After becoming an immortal, it was evil. Good until the end is evil. Evil until the awakening is good. Just like a person's life, how could there be a conclusion? The Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron let out waves of sobs. That was the awakening of Leap 8's spiritual wisdom, crying for the friend who had accompanied him for millions of years. When an immortal died, he left his body. Now, he realized that it was time for his soul to leave. This human who had been with him for millions of years, whether they were master or friend, whether they used each other or supported each other, no matter what, after millions of years, a special feeling had been cultivated. Regretfully, when it was reborn, immortal Wu Hua was about to completely leave. He couldn't even leave behind a trace of his soul. Amidst the sobs, the Tao realm force field began to become unstable. That was the pain that came from the depths of its heart. Even its life Leap Earth Great Tao began to become unstable, full of loopholes. To be honest, this was the best time for the two half-immortals to attack. However, neither of them made a move. At this moment, they somewhat understood the immortal's helplessness, sadness, and separation. Immortal Wu Hua recalled his life. My life has been ordinary. This is not being pretentious. If one day, after living for millions of years, you still can't bring out a few deeds that you can speak of, this kind of life on the path of immortality doesn't have much meaning. Unfortunately, when I understood, I already lacked the strength to rise. For millions of years, I have been waiting, but I couldn't summon up the determination to change. In the end, I waited until now. I was abandoned by the Great Tao. I don't blame the Great Tao. I can only blame myself for being conservative. If you can't adapt to the new universe, the heavenly Tao will abandon you. It's a matter of course. I wanted to resist, but when I really resisted, I found that my resistance was a joke. I only pulled two younger disciples to talk some useless nonsense. It was a distraction, harming others without benefiting myself. Now, at least what I can do is to give my friend, numinous treasure, a stable future. I shouldn't be so selfish. I want to fight to the death but drag down my friend who has accompanied me for millions of years. As the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron trembled, the Tao realm power changed. Lu Xiaoyi and the Empyrean Divine Conch were forced into a corner. The Tao realm consciousness of the bamboo hat that had fused into the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron was also completely stripped out. Then, an illusory energy body appeared. It was the remnant soul of immortal Wu Hua that had remained in the heaven cauldron when he died. At this moment, he could see it very clearly. Resist? He couldn't do it himself, so he could only rely on the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron's ability. The final result would be to bring his old friend to destruction. Could he succeed in killing or getting rid of these two juniors? Actually, it wasn't important. After passing this test, he couldn't pass the next one. Moreover, there were some words that he didn't want to say a second time. As the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron was reluctant to part, the remnant soul of this immortal slowly left the secret space of the numinous treasure. We, the so-called immortals, actually let down these juniors who desire to become immortals the most. They are full of desire and work hard for their entire lives, just for that chance to become immortals. But in our eyes, their efforts are destined to fail. This has nothing to do with hard work or not. It's because of many external reasons. The resentful spirit bodies instantly sensed the immortal's aura and crazily rushed over. Thousands upon thousands of them, endless. All the spirit bodies near the black hole rushed over. After starving for millions of years, they had finally waited for the most delicious food. Immortal Wu Hua didn't resist and allowed the spirit bodies to eat him. Cherish it. The change of an era is the best opportunity, because the order will become chaotic at this stage. Your generation may not be the most outstanding in the cultivation world of the universe, but it is the most fortunate. Immortal Wu Hua's remnant soul gradually faded away under the frenzied attacks of the resentful spirit bodies. From the beginning to the end, he didn't make any resistance. This also included the Empyrean Divine Conch that didn't know what was going on and the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron that was ordered not to interfere. Of course, this also included the two half-immortal freaks who were watching with their mouths agape. They knew that they could complete the mission, but they didn't know that it would be in such an easy way. Chapter 2006. Taking advantage of immortal Wu Hua's suicide, the bamboo hat slowly withdrew his consciousness from the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron. He actually had the chance to control this innate spiritual treasure, but he did not do so, because he could feel the deep hatred of the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron towards the two human half-immortals. Subduing it was no different from subduing a barrel of gunpowder. It was like forcing the death of a child's parents in front of him. Therefore, he might as well leave. Furthermore, he could not guarantee that the swordsman hiding in the empty divine magic conch would not have any thoughts of eliminating him. He took 2 steps, but to the swordsman who was used to killing enemies above his level, 2 steps were not enough. Luckily, the swordsman did not make any moves. Who knows if it was because of immortal Wu Hua's words, or because it was afraid of him. His body instantly formed, and he did not care if the remnant soul of immortal Wu Hua had not been completely eaten. He just left and did not look back. Lu Xiaoyi did not move at all. It was not that he could not see the bamboo hat's movement. It was also not that he was afraid of being attacked by the resentful spiritual bodies and did not dare to make a move. He just felt that there was no need. It was not worth it. However, immortal Wu Hua's consciousness had not been completely eaten. Even if there were countless spiritual bodies in front of the remnant soul of an immortal, it was still enough for them to eat for a period of time. The closer to the core, the harder it was to eat. Especially after the bamboo hat left, it displayed an astonishing vitality. Why did you not make a move? That half-immortal is proficient in the great Tao like you. He is your biggest enemy. Immortal Wu Hua was still curious even when he was about to die. Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly. There is no need to make a move against an opponent who is not brave enough. In this kind of situation, both sides might suffer. Is it not good to leave him alive? If I really kill him, the higher-ups will find me an even stronger opponent. Junior likes to fight, but I do not like to fight endlessly. Immortal Wu Hua smiled. Smart? You are stronger than that ancestor of yours. There are many things that cannot be solved by fighting. Fighting is only the prerequisite and guarantee for scheming. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Senior Nose Crow ancestor? Immortal Wu Hua was very regretful, no? The time is too short, there is no chance. This is the regret of many immortals like me in the immortal court. We haven't been able to understand it for millions of years, but fellow Taoist Crow was able to see it right away. Otherwise, the Four Saints' Heavens would gather a resistance force that even the immortal court didn't have. If he does not lead, we will be scattered. Lu Xiaoyi disagreed. Don't flatter me. If that is the case, then even the current situation would not be good. Immortal Wu Hua was annoyed. Are you saying that us immortals are all pig teammates? Lu Xiaoyi Wu Hua smiled but did not answer. Wu Hua as well, as immortal Wu Hua's Wu Wus. Liaz's Li Wu Hua, he, cuz, Li immortals, IMS, immortals, immortals as well, immortals, Li, immortals, pay, immortals, to Wu Hua. He said that he admired Li Wuya, and that was probably the truth. After all, Li Wuya's actions back then had earned him the respect of both friends and foes. But admiration was one thing, and following him was another. 20,000 years ago, when Li Wu Hua was in the immortal court, there were no immortals following him. Even if they only supported him verbally, what was the point of regretting it after 20,000 years? In this sense, he was no different from those who had not accomplished anything in the mortal world. Everyone knew how to give advice in hindsight, but only at the time and place could it show its value. But at the last moment of his life, immortal Wu Hua's cherishing of his spirit treasure still showed some qualities of immortal Wu Hua. Whether it was lowering his head before fate or returning to his nature, he was willing to treat Li Wu Hua as a senior worthy of respect. After all, being able to become an immortal was proof of his excellence. There was not much time left. He knew what an old man hoped for the most at the last moment. It was respect, respect, respect. Therefore, he only needed to ask more questions. This would make him feel that there was room for improvement, even if these suggestions were not accepted. Senior, I vaguely saw the changes in the immortal court. Could it be that every immortal has to go through this? Doesn't that mean that the entire immortal court is facing a great change? Immortal Wu Hua said, your thoughts are both right and wrong. In fact, because the immortal court itself did not have an accurate judgment, there were all kinds of opinions. It was also because of the unclear judgment that the news that spread to the lower realm often lost its rigor, making people at a loss. But with the fall of the golden immortals one by one, and now it has expanded to the human immortals, some judgments have basically been concluded. I don't dare to say that it is definitely so, but the direction of Dafa has gradually become clear. There are still many changes in the details, but the direction of Dafa is more or less set. In the next few hundred years, the more certain statements will spread to the mortal world. You need to judge the truth yourself. There will be a lot of fake news, and the people who spread it have ulterior motives. You have to learn to distinguish between them. He had decided to share some of his experiences with this junior from the lower worlds. Not for anything else, but for the sake of this junior's orthodoxy. Only when he had fallen to such a state did he truly understand what Li Wuya had sacrificed back then. The innate great Tao collapses, and an immortal dies. We can't completely determine the order and time of the collapse in advance. We can only narrow this range to a certain extent, probably earlier and more accurate than your intuition. But there is one thing that the Circle of Golden Immortals is clear about, but they won't say it. But since everyone is in the four sacred heavens, they can always sense something. For example, what I told you just now, the innate Great Tao fragments have the consciousness of the Golden Immortal Great Tao Master. I didn't lie to you about this. However, you must remember that not every single Grand Tao Lord acts in this way. I can't distinguish, that's not within the scope of my ability. I can't guess, that goes against my cultivation philosophy. What I want to say is that at the very least, the first two great Tao's collapse, morality and destiny, don't have a great Tao Master's consciousness attached to them. You come from the sword vein of Xinyuan. Out of respect for Li Wuya, I'm telling you something deeper. Even if Li Wuya is actually the one who destroyed my job, as for morality and destiny, it's up to you juniors to see if your eyes are bright enough. Lu Xiaoyi said bitterly, Senior, you can't completely blame Crow Ancestor, right? The change of eras is an internal need of the universe's changes. Immortal Wu Hua snorted. The principle is correct, but there's a matter of time. It's normal for a cultivator to go into seclusion for 100 years, but it's the life of a mortal. A nap by the heavens is 1,000,000 years, and millions of years is the life of an immortal. Yerli Wuya is the one who made the heavens less of a nap, and in the end, ruined my life. So I said that he's the instigator. Am I wronging him? Chapter 2007. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Indeed, on the level of the universe, ending its nap in advance was everything to the immortals. The immortal elder did not dwell on this. He really did not have much time left. When the universe changes, the 36 innate great Daos will disperse. This is the prerequisite for the change. Only by breaking it can it be rebuilt. But the problem is, what if it's still the same piece of mud? What kind of new things can you create? The Golden Immortals did not oppose the change of the era. Firstly, they also knew that this was the general trend and could not be stopped. Secondly, they knew that they were still the same piece of mud. Therefore, since the collapse of the Great Daos, the rules in all aspects became stricter. Everyone was in their place. Immortals were not allowed to go down to the 4 sacred heavens, and half immortals were restricted to the inner and outer scenic heavens. It was as if they were welcoming the new era with joy. Even a rabbit knows to kick its legs before it dies. Are the high and mighty immortals so good-tempered as to resign themselves to adversity? It was not that they were willing to do so, but because of the pressure from Qingwei Heaven, they had no choice but to do so. If they were obedient, they would not be punished openly. Of course, the golden immortals of Shangqing Heaven would not be so ruthless. They also had to give the human immortals and genuine immortals a way out. The prerequisite is that you have to be valued by them, connected to their Tao meridians, and useful. Otherwise, you will be like me now. You can only complain to a junior half-immortal from the lower realm. Lu Xiaoyi listened quietly, trying to find something useful for himself. He knew that this was the old immortal's last fight against injustice. Although this fight was a little too insignificant, like some complaints, he could not ask for too much. After all, if the immortal elder was not like this, how could he be reduced to the point of being the first to fall in the inner scenic heavens? The golden immortals and Daluo golden immortals will not be left alive. But no one knows which method they will use to return. But in my opinion, at least half of the golden immortals after the change of the future era are simply old wine in a new bottle. The rest are those who are disdainful and those who have failed the bottle. Next, I will talk about the genuine immortals and human immortals. They have no great Tao fragments to rely on, so they can only use other methods. Take my method, for example, but everyone has their own abilities, so it's not something that I can recklessly predict. Lu Xiaoyi added, do all immortals face this tribulation? Immortal Wu Hua was very certain, of course. There were countless Daos in the universe, each with their own unique characteristics. But no matter which post-celestial Tao it was, weren't they all derived from the evolution of innate Daos? Some took one and some took many. One could say that it was a combination of the 36 innate Daos, but they were all related to the combination of the 36 innate Daos. With the 36 innate Daos crumbling and the foundation gone, how could these post-innate Daos survive alone? However, due to the different combinations and different levels of immersion, there was a difference in order. However, at the final moment of the epic changing, no one could escape. I'm the first immortal to die in the interior heaven, but I'm not the first to die in the immortal court. There were already immortals in the Blight realm who died in the interior heaven, but you didn't know about it. Lu Xiaoyi was very alert. Actually, the new bottle of old wine you said, to put it bluntly, it's possession, right? At this time, immortal Wu Hua was a bit fearless. Your understanding isn't wrong. However, you have to understand that the so-called possession in the lower cultivation world is actually the most unskilled kind of possession. Forcefully controlling a cultivator's soul and replacing it has too many repercussions, and there's no guarantee of success. Immortals wouldn't do that. To immortals, the highest level of possession is like those golden immortals, splitting their consciousness into countless parts and casting a wide net to catch the big fish. Only then can they guarantee a higher success rate. Before you become an immortal, you won't be able to sense their existence. You will be you, but your understanding of the Tao realm will slowly guide you through time. You will unknowingly walk in the same direction as them, and finally become a Tao realm expert like them. Do you still think that you are talented in the Tao realm? We call this method the Tao realm possession. You are still you, but in terms of Tao realm, you are a copy of a golden immortal. And this golden immortal is also using this method to achieve the goal of rebirth and continue to control this natural great Tao according to his understanding. Don't think of immortals, especially golden immortals and great overarching golden immortals, too narrow-minded. They actually don't care about this body at all. Your habits, past and future, your friends and family, they don't care about any of these. Because when you become an immortal, these things have to be abandoned. They only care about Tao realm, and as long as this natural great Tao still exists, they will use this method to achieve eternal life. They will conceal themselves among the many people with such potential, completely unconscious, and wholeheartedly help you comprehend Tao, just like you comprehended it yourself. If at some time, you feel as if you've been enlightened, with flashes of inspiration and frequent epiphanies, then you have to be careful. This may not be your true ability. These people could be first severance or second severance. They could be sun god or blight tier. No matter, they won't even stop the competition between cultivators with the same golden immortal's consciousness attached to them. Everything will be left to nature until the moment they truly become an immortal. That is the day they take over control. Of course, you are still you, but Tao realm is no longer you. That is some golden immortals. So even if you want me to say whether you are still you at this time, I can't say for sure. This is the most brilliant possession. What the golden immortals are seizing is not your person, but the natural great Tao. As long as the natural great Tao is his, then what does it matter which half-immortal finally takes that step? This time, Lu Xiaoyi was truly dumbfounded. If the people above schemed against the cultivators below like this, how many half-immortals could resist? Deity Wu Hua was very satisfied with this junior's shock. He finally made this stubborn little guy become serious. However, your sword vein doesn't have to be too worried. 20, 30 natural great Taos, and there won't be any golden immortal's consciousness that will choose to help the sword vein, especially your Xinyuan sword sect, because that crow ancestor of yours is really too detestable in the immortal court. Most importantly, they are also afraid that their great Tao has anything to do with Li Wuya's natural morals. The facts have long proven that those who are entangled with Li Wuya all don't have a good ending. So I am very relieved to say these words to you. If it was an orthodox Taoist, I wouldn't dare to speak freely. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Being detestable had such an effect? He also knew that this was only deity Wu Hua's guess, and was not absolute. What if there was one who didn't walk the normal path? They were all at least golden immortal existences, so what couldn't they do? This old guy was very detestable. With just a few words, he made him suspicious of all the freaks, even including those closest to him. True, if there weren't these golden immortals hiding behind to help, how could such a freak appear? Chapter 2008. But there was one thing that Qing Xin did not seem to have any problems, because the Tao of Yin and Yang had not collapsed. Senior sister Yin Song was also fine, and the cycle of reincarnation had not collapsed. But just because there was no problem now did not mean there would be no problem in the future. This matter was tricky. Who could control their own pursuit of their own Tao fragments? Deity Wuchua was still talking endlessly, but his consciousness was transmitted very quickly, and he probably realized that there was not much time left. What I said just now was the way of golden immortals. With the help of the Tao fragments, they did not have to worry about not being able to find a successor. This method can actually be used by man immortals and true immortals, but it is too troublesome. To find someone in the universe who has the same post-celestial Tao as themselves and has enough potential is extremely difficult, so they would usually look for it in their own orthodoxy. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. What orthodoxy can be passed down for millions of years and still be as good as before? Deity Wichua said, exactly. So Tao state possession is very rare among true immortals and man-immortals. There may be an example, but it cannot be popularized. But they have other methods, such as the construction of the past self and the future superego. Lu Xiaoyi's eyes were opened. In the methods of immortals, there was nothing they could not do, especially the construction of the future superego. Immortals implanted their current situation into the superego vision of the half-immortal cultivators, making them think that this is the template of their future after becoming immortals. So they keep working hard in this direction and finally willingly become someone else. There are many similar methods, but they have one thing in common, which is that they will never forcibly invade your mind and attack your spirit. That is the lowest level method, and the consequences are endless. Deity Wichua was indignant, but his consciousness was getting weaker and weaker. My ability in this area is a little weak. I could not find a cultivator of the Leap Earth Tao, and my own technique could not invade the past and future of others, so I could only do it by force. So I became a negative example. Lu Xiaoyi said weakly, you seem to be a little late in arranging things after death. Deity Wichua admitted, yes, I am not vigilant enough. I did not plan ahead, and my own ability is not in this area. In these hundreds of years, I don't know if you have noticed, but all kinds of spiritual treasures and strange objects have suddenly appeared in the universe. It was just that the immortals themselves could not descend to the lower realm, so they threw down their treasures, especially in the inner and outer scenic sky where half-immortals gather. If you encounter a similar fortuitous encounter one day, you must be careful. Lu Xiaoyi blushed with shame. In this aspect, I haven't had any fortuitous encounters, so I don't care too much about it. Immortal Wu Hua mocked himself. That's right. I forgot that you came from the sword vein. You don't care about external things. This is a good habit. The remnant soul of the immortal elder had become so thin that it was barely visible to the naked eye. His time would soon be up as the countless resentful spirits gnawed at him. With a final sigh, his divine sense became very weak. My life has been a boring one. If I could do it all over again, I would have raised my arms and cheered when Li Wuya shattered his Tao. Unfortunately, even immortals can't cure regret. These hateful spiritual entities are like ants gnawing at my soul. Dying in such a way would be the most shameful way for an immortal to die, right? I've more or less made up for the debt I owed them. In the end, I still hope to die with dignity. Little friend, take out your flying sword and send me on my way. Lu Xiaoyi did not move at all. His tone was sentimental. Old senior, my sword is for killing enemies, not friends. Immortal Wu Hua shouted, so long-winded. You don't have the spirit of a swordsman at all. You've cultivated for thousands of years, and you don't even have this bit of decisiveness? You're just going to watch an old man suffer in front of you? 10,000 ants gnawing at his heart, unbearable pain? I came willingly, there's no karma. Don't make me look down on you for being so wishy-washy. Lu Xiaoyi still did not move. He said with sincerity, I can't do it. I'm a soft-hearted person. I'm afraid that if I kill an immortal today, I'll have nightmares when I go back. Immortal Wu Hua became silent. After a long time, he said, what's wrong with this world? It's become so cold. There's no trust between people. Even if I give you all my life's experience and the highest secret of the immortal court, I still can't get a quick death? Lu Xiaoyi was very ashamed. Although I'm from the sword vein, I'm not a bloodthirsty person. I do good deeds, respect the old and love the young. I do good deeds every day. Immortal Wu Hua's remnant soul struggled and swayed. It was flickering, about to be extinguished at any moment. The two waited in silence for it to end. Regardless of whether Immortal Wu Hua was in pain or not, Lu Xiaoyi's heart was as hard as iron. The resentful spiritual entities became even crazier. Because there was not much food left, the scene of hundreds of thousands of formless spiritual entities squeezing together made one's scalp tingle. At the last moment, Immortal Wu Hua sighed. Good, good, good. Human swordsman is quick to repay kindness and revenge, forthright and chivalrous. Looking at you today, you're just like Li Wuya from back then, two-faced and sinister. I didn't lose unjustly. I can't blame anyone. The resentful spiritual entities swallowed the last piece of food. Those who didn't manage to snatch it began to howl crazily, throwing each other into a mess. Lu Xiaoyi began to slowly retreat. He glanced at the silent Leap 8 Heaven's Cauldron. He didn't want to say anything, but since he had already completed the task, he couldn't delay the great monarch's orders. The universe is chaotic, and the clan is a harbor. The Numinous Treasure Clan's main goal in this chaos is to protect themselves. So if you want to live safely, joining the clan is a good choice. The Numinous Treasure Great Monarch asked me to pass you a message. If you're interested, you should interact more and understand the chaos of this world. It's always beneficial. The Leap 8 Heaven's Cauldron was indifferent, not saying a word. Lu Xiaoyi was a little bored. He had already passed the message, so the rest had nothing to do with him. But since he had already spoken, he didn't mind saying a few more words. You know what your master wants, right? Leap 8 snorted. So what if I know? Shouldn't I? Only you are allowed to scheme against us, but we can't retaliate? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Of course. That's your right. I came here to accept the task. If necessary, I can even destroy you. So no matter what you do, I won't care. What I find strange is, why did you choose me out of the two of you? Is it because my potential is greater? This time, Leap 8 replied, Immortal Elder lost because he was too soft-hearted. He wanted to do bad things, but he couldn't harden his heart. He wanted to do good things, but he didn't have the will to do so. In such a dilemma, he couldn't rely on either side. In the end, the heavenly Tao came to him first. It's not without reason. Lu Xiaoyi asked, Lord Leap awakened his spiritual wisdom before the Immortal Elder's accident, right? Leap 8 snorted. My awakening happened thousands of years ago. The wisdom of the numinous treasure is innate wisdom, and there's no need to cultivate it. 1,000 years ago, I advised him to make plans early and prepare for a rainy day. In the end, he couldn't do anything. He didn't have many methods to begin with, and he had countless scruples. In the end, other than helping him plant a trace of his true spirit in my body, he didn't accomplish anything else. Coveting luck and being afraid of the slightest thing, how can he not be defeated? Chapter 2009. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. In his contact with this immortal Wu Hua, he found that this person did indeed have such a problem. It was somewhat inconceivable for this kind of personality defect to appear among immortals, but after thinking about it carefully, it seemed to make sense. It was still necessary to start with the cultivation environment to completely understand the huge impact of the changes in the cultivation era on cultivators. In the current cultivation world, each and every one of the cultivators was extremely cunning. Each and every one of them had a 7-orifices heart, a vision, and a way of dealing with people. They were indispensable in all aspects. If not, you would not be able to climb up and would have been eliminated by the waves. Therefore, almost all of them were decisive, persevering, and making choices. When it was time to take risks, they would not hesitate. Just like that Ding Shan that Lu Xiaoyi met, he had ordinary aptitude, ordinary potential, and also came from a refining background. When it was time to be ruthless, he could also be ruthless. When dealing with the two half-immortal monsters, he was also ruthless. This was the characteristic of the era. With the prevalence of cultivation in the universe, cultivators were forced to strengthen themselves in terms of mental state. Only by not having obvious personality defects could they survive. But if time was turned back millions of years, the cultivation environment at that time was completely different from now. Most of the energy of the current cultivators was fighting with people, while most of the energy of the ancient cultivators was fighting with nature. The difference was huge. It was precisely because there were not many cultivators in the ancient times, and most of the immortals were born during that period, that it was normal for immortals to have personality defects in some aspects. Of course, this also had to be reversed. It was precisely because the immortals in the ancient times were purer that there were relatively fewer messy things. Nothing was absolute. If every immortal was like the current cultivators, all 7 orifices heart, good at internal strife, and full of culture, not to mention millions of years, it was hard to say if the cultivation world of this universe could persist for hundreds of thousands of years. Each had its own advantages and disadvantages. That was why the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron ridiculed its owner like this, a friend that had accompanied it for millions of years. I told him long ago that he had to prepare early and plan in the lower realm in advance. He didn't listen and insisted on talking about the rules of immortality. When the signs of immortal death appeared, I advised him to speed up the process and sent me to the lower realm to obtain an opportunity to set up a trap in the mortal world. He was afraid of death, so he insisted on dragging me along to fight against the heavenly solution. In the end, he didn't last for many years. When he died, his remnant soul followed me to the lower bound. I advised him to immediately take over my body and not hesitate. Things might change if he delayed. However, he was afraid of the punishment from the immortal court. In the end, he came to such a desolate place, and nothing changed. Even if the two of you appeared, he still had a chance. He took advantage of the bamboo hat to transform into a Tao realm and enter my body. There was actually a high chance that he could use the Tao realm to possess my body and hide in it without anyone noticing. In the end, he was afraid that he would offend the golden immortal consciousnesses that had transformed into consciousnesses and seek revenge on him. I'm afraid that the orthodox Taoism is too powerful, so I'm hesitating. The more the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron talked, the angrier it became. There were so many opportunities in the beginning that he didn't dare to make a decision. But now, at the last moment, he gave up the safest option with the highest success rate and chose the most dramatic method of possession. They couldn't even hold him back. He said that the swordsman's brain wasn't good, that the sword vein wasn't well-liked in the immortal court, and that no one took care of it. He said that he knew that there was a tiger in the mountain, but he still insisted on going to the mountain. He said that he would fight to live even if he was in the face of death. In fact, he lost his mind at the last moment. He knew that he had lost many opportunities because of his cowardice. In the end, he became unreasonable and impulsive. Lu Xiaoyi was sweating profusely. Lord Leap, what is possession by refining weapons? The Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron curled its lips. Isn't it an ability that he learned from me? There are Tao realm possession, future construction possession, and so on. He's good at refining, so he can obtain it through artifacts, such as a cultivator's life-bound artifact. For you, of course, it's the flying sword. Previously, he expressed his goodwill in every possible way and wanted to dig out his heart, such as admiring Li Wuya and so on. In fact, it was to obtain a certain degree of sympathy from you. This way, as long as you slashed at him with your sword, you would definitely have pity in your heart, and there would be a flaw in your killing intent. His core remnant soul would be able to take advantage of this and quietly sneak into your sword plate when you put away your sword. In the future, it would slowly influence you, imperceptibly, and finally affect you. What? You don't know about this? Then why did you refuse to slay him? Isn't it because you saw something? Lu Xiaoyi didn't hide anything. There was no need for him to hide anything from an innate spiritual treasure like the Leap 8. I can see part of the state of the resentment spiritual body. What puzzles me is that these spiritual bodies seem to have swallowed a lot, but they actually don't have the slightest involvement with the core of the immortal elder. Obviously, you can't reason with these spiritual bodies and make them pay attention to what they should and shouldn't swallow when they swallow. Then, there's only one possibility. The core remnant soul of the immortal elder has a way to protect itself. What is he waiting for? Is this what he meant by solemn and stirring? So, I will definitely refuse his request. I'm not brave. I'm afraid of death and pain. This time, it was the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron's turn to be speechless. I understand. I understand. The immortal elder has been high and mighty for too long, too far away from the intrigues of the mortal world. He thinks that his plan is unparalleled, but in the eyes of you lower realm cultivators, it's full of loopholes. I've already advised him not to touch a swordsman. Swordsman is too evil. Just find an ordinary one. Lu Xiaoyi corrected it. Leap Lord, you've been saying that your master is wrong. But do you know that you're wrong? He's the master, and you're the supplement. If you say too much, you'll make your master lose face. And there are some things that you've said wrong. Why would he choose an ordinary one? If he really chose an ordinary one and couldn't become an immortal, what's the point of everything he's done? He probably chose me because he thinks more highly of me. Or maybe the crow ancestor has stimulated him too much, so he wants to become a swordsman to do things. Forget it. How can these things be explained clearly? The immortal elder is already confused, and you speak bluntly. Also, what I want to know is, that bamboo hat person who left, he knows what's going to happen next, right? The Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron hesitated slightly, but still decided to tell the truth. He knows. The immortal elder communicated with him. There's karma between them, and as a thought, the immortal elder didn't want to drag him down. Lu Xiaoyi said meaningfully, I'm afraid it's not just that, right? The immortal elder appeared to help someone achieve the second severance. Can this also be considered a kind of possession? That bamboo hat person has already fallen for it, right? The immortal elder only wanted to be more secure, and setting up a trap on two people is better than one. So the one released must be him, because he's already fallen for it. What do you think of my words, Leap Lord? The Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron was silent, but silence was actually also a kind of attitude. Lu Xiaoyi laughed loudly. Why are you telling me this? Actually, you can also remain silent. Chapter 2010. The Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron was a little depressed. It realized that no matter if it was its former master or itself, they were incomparable to the most outstanding human beings in terms of intelligence. You didn't expose the immortal old man's intentions in the end, allowing him to retain a bit of face. He's very prideful, so I'm willing to say a few more words to you. Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly. For someone like him, who was experienced and had seen through human nature, this was the most basic quality. He only had a little bit of soul left, so what was there to expose? What good would it do for you if you made him unhappy before he died? It would be better to find an excuse so that both sides wouldn't expose each other, leaving each other some face. This kind of attitude was the attitude of cultivation. See, the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron was about to reap the rewards. Otherwise, why would it say a few more words to him? This fully showed that even if he was about to die, he still cared about his face. If he wasn't used to doing evil, it would be very strange if he did it once, and it would be even more embarrassing if he was exposed again. In fact, there were many similar examples in the modern world. If he was caught doing evil for the first time and was humiliated, he might go all out and do worse things. However, if you gave him a way out, he might feel that he wasn't made to be an evil person and stop. There was a lot of knowledge in dealing with people, but unfortunately, not everyone understood this. Your master, your immortal friend isn't a bad person. This is actually very clear, because he died the earliest. A real evil immortal doesn't die. In the beginning, he was pushed out to take the blame. Over 1,000,000 years of cultivation had been wasted just like that. No one would be willing to accept that. If it were me, I would have done a lot of evil things long ago. The immortal old man was a good person. At least he didn't want to drag you down in the end. The Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron began to whimper. Although its mouth was full of complaints, how could it forget millions of years of living together in the blink of an eye? It had just been born not long ago, so it didn't know how to express or hide its feelings. But no matter what, this half-immortal swordsman wasn't annoying. Just like it, he had a poisonous mouth but a good heart. After staying in the immortal world for millions of years, it wouldn't have many friends down there. However, if it had to find someone it could trust, it would rather believe this cunning swordsman. It had a request, and it didn't want to hide it. Lu Jun, I don't want a third person to know about Xianwang's final destination. In fact, we all know that the immortal elder's intentions may not be as he wishes. Everything bodes ill for him. However, there was no reason for everyone to know about it, especially the person himself. The meaning of Leap 8 was very clear. Wu Hua, Immortal Elder, took advantage of the display of the immortals and picked the bamboo hat out of all the cultivators in the inner scenic heaven observatory. He gave him benefits and also lit up a lamp for his future rebirth. Even lighting up a lamp was far from enough. Even the golden immortals would cast a wide net throughout the universe and use numbers to make up for the success rate, let alone a mere human immortal like him. But as long as it was lit, there was hope. Lu Xiaoyi glanced at it. You don't sound like you're begging. What if I don't agree? What do you plan to do? The Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron said without hesitation, I can't speak. You know that. No one in the immortal court talked to me. It was normal for us not to communicate for tens of thousands of years. But Xian Wang is my friend. If you don't agree, I'll perish together with you here. Even if I can't do anything to you, with these resentful spirits around, you won't have a good time either. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. A very good threat. You've grasped the main point. It's reasonable and has the means and consequences. And I've decided to submit to your threat. But if we make a deal, it's more meaningful and safer than a threat. Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron was very confused. I don't seem to have anything that I can take out for a deal other than myself. Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. I don't dare to take you. Otherwise, I won't even be able to sleep well. Originally, after I killed the last remnant soul of Wu Hua, Immortal Elder, I felt uneasy and often blamed myself. Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron asked, when did you kill him? Didn't you refuse to use the last sword? As soon as it said that, it immediately reacted. Yes, my eyes are playing tricks on me. I remembered wrongly. The last remnant soul of Xian Wang was killed by Lord Lu. He fell into Xian Wang's Tao of artifact forging and possession. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. You think that humans are too cunning? That they scheme against each other all the time? That you can't get along? Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron spoke the truth. Yes, it feels like I'll be sold out at any time. If I talk to you more, I don't know which pit I'll fall into again. I'll accept your suggestion. When I'm stable, I'll contact the Great Lord. Lord Lu, are you familiar with the Great Lord? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. Not familiar, but he's my senior. After arranging all the trivial matters, Lu Xiaoyi began to return with the empty god magic conch. His current cultivation ability had been reduced to more than 60%, which was close to the edge of danger. Fortunately, the mission this time was more daunting than dangerous. Otherwise, it would be really difficult to end it. A seemingly peaceful process was actually fraught with danger. On the surface, he looked timid, but in reality, he was constantly up to no good. After meeting him this time, he would probably not see him for a while, so he would definitely avoid him on purpose. This person was also very interesting. He always made you feel that he was avoiding you, but when you really met him, he made you feel that he was unbearable. Then, in this feeling of contempt, you would be viciously tricked again, and then drifted far away. Lu Xiaoyi was good at tactics, while the other was good at strategy. It was clear who was better. Qing Xian and the others were also confused by his appearance, right? But the older the ginger, the spicier it was in the end. He was still the one who was tricked. Lu Xiaoyi was very willing to cooperate with his friends. He raised and raised again. What left the deepest impression on him from this trip was that immortals were no longer so high and mighty. They also had helplessness, weaknesses, and shortcomings. In fact, their shortcomings were very obvious. They were not as powerful and invincible as he had imagined. A very practical reason was that if you wanted to train a person's conspiracy, then it was best to put him in the dirtiest place in the world, the imperial court. Under this premise, in fact, the immortal court was far from complicated. Because there were too few immortals, their superior methods could be predicted and judged. As a cultivator from the lower bound, they were not completely led by the nose. This was a very important discovery. Don't think of the opponent as too strong. As a cultivator from the lower bound, they still had the power to fight. Of course, golden immortals and Deluo golden immortals might be an exception. The situation of immortal Wu Hua told him that there were actually many immortals who were not satisfied in the four sacred heavens. In theory, such people accounted for the majority. They might also be the largest group that would cause chaos in the lower bound in the future. Possession was given a new meaning by the immortals. It was completely different from the definition of possession in the minds of the cultivators in the main world. In the eyes of the immortals, the body was not important, and even the thoughts were not important. What was important was the Tao state. As long as the Tao state existed, it was eternal. No matter who obtained the favor of the heavenly Tao in the end, after a long time, whether you were a newcomer or an old master of the great Tao, under the same understanding of the Tao state, what was the difference? Or perhaps the golden immortals and Daluo golden immortals were just carriers, and the real masters of the universe were these innate great Taos? As long as they acknowledged me, anyone could be the Taoist master. Chapter 2011. Lu Xiaoyi had always been biased against the changing trends of the epochs. He had always believed that it was appropriate to divide the period before the change of era into 3 periods. Before the 12 great Taos collapsed, it was the early stage. Only cultivators from the mortal world could participate. Before the 24 great Taos collapsed, they were in the middle stage. There were half-immortal freaks who came down to the lower realm. In the middle and later stages, there might be true half-immortals who came down. Before all 36 great Taos collapsed, it was the era of immortals. The role of half-immortals like them would be very limited. He was also worried about how the outstanding half-immortals would coexist with the immortals during this era. In the field of martial arts, he would most likely not be able to beat them. In the field of literature, he could only become a pawn of the immortals of the lower realm. However, after hearing immortal elder Wu Hua's words, he suddenly realized that even in the later stages before the epic change, immortals might not be able to descend, because they were like clay bodhisattvas crossing a river, unable to even protect themselves. The collapse of the great Tao could destroy existences like golden immortals and zenith heaven golden immortals. There was no reason why it could not destroy existences like human immortals and true immortals. It was all the same. With the rebuilding of the great Tao, the immortal court would definitely be rebuilt as well. The crux of the problem was, how many newcomers would climb up during this rebuilding process? How many old immortals had changed their appearances? Based on this inference, the conflict between Buddhism and Taoism, as well as the conflict between heterodox schools, was not the most important thing. Most importantly, the battle between the new forces and the old forces was the focal point of the change of eras. If you want to achieve something, at the very least, you have to know the general trend. Otherwise, you will be like a headless fly, unable to use your strength properly. Immortals could not descend, because not a single one of them could survive until the end of the epoch. From now on, or perhaps from a few hundred years ago, the immortal court had become an extra-large graveyard. Immortals continued to fall from the sky. It might have been slower at the beginning, but it would become faster and faster as more and more great Taos collapsed. Meanwhile, those post-celestial great Taos that were formed from the combination of pre-celestial great Taos would not be able to hold on any longer. With their Tao foundation damaged, they would no longer have a reason to become an immortal. Who would collapse if not you? The one that could last until the end would definitely be the last connate great Tao and the postnatal great Tao that was related to it. It could be time, or it could be unification. It was hard to say. Under such a procedure, the immortals were all in danger. They didn't even have time to make arrangements for their funerals, so how could they have the mood to come down to the lower realm and get involved in the right and wrong? To them, the most important thing was to find a new bottle to keep their old wine in after the change of era. Other than that, nothing else mattered. From this, it could be inferred that the first stage of the universe's changes had already passed, which was the stage of the cultivators of the origin world. The middle stage should be dominated by monstrous half-immortal geniuses like them, and the late stage should be the stage for all half-immortals. When would the immortals appear? It should be after the change of the era. Let's call it the post-epic era. At this time, many new and old immortals officially appeared. They had ascended to immortality and joined the Tao at the moment the epoch changed. There was no longer the danger of their Tao collapsing. Thus, they began to form factions and fight for territory and the right to speak. This was the normal rhythm. Only when he understood this point did he know what he should and shouldn't do now. In other words, he could have acted even more arrogantly. He could have roped in more forces and friends, and strived to become the spokesperson of the emerging forces in the post-epic era. What the Crow ancestor wanted to do, others didn't even dare to think about, and those rebellious thoughts could only be achieved in this way. For the first time, Lu Xiaoyi had a plan for his future. This was his strength. To achieve this, it was impossible to rely on brute force alone. The Crow ancestor's fist was strong enough, but what was the result? He had to find a common point of interest. These people, these half-immortals, these future rulers of the immortal court, couldn't stand on his side just because of a friendship. He had to make them feel that there were benefits to be gained, and that there was a future to look forward to. Lu Xiaoyi floated in the void of the mirror, silently reflecting. This Heavenly Eyes mission was very meaningful to him. From now on, he had a clear enough plan. For his own cultivation, he also had countless reference templates for the construction of his future superego. It was no longer as vague and muddle-headed as before. On the way back, there was one more thing he needed to observe, and that was the fragments of the Great Path in his Mudpill Palace. He wanted to try and see if he could find the traces left by the Golden Immortals on them. This possibility was not big, because he had been with each fragment for at least hundreds of years, and he was very familiar with them. If there were any abnormalities, he should have found them long ago, and not wait until now. Sure enough, no matter what special method he used, he couldn't find any abnormalities. This didn't mean that there were no traces of the Golden Immortals on these fragments of the Great Path. In his opinion, there were only two possibilities. Either the Golden Immortals didn't feel suitable, so they didn't show up and stayed undercover until the end of time, or the Golden Immortals didn't feel suitable, so the traces disappeared automatically, as if they had never existed. There was a limit to the traces of the Golden Immortals' consciousness, and it was impossible to maintain countless branches forever. When the fragments were captured by nature, they would naturally disappear, or for those cultivators who had no hope of becoming immortals. He didn't find them, and he couldn't judge whether they existed or not. He would just leave them as they were. Of course, he wouldn't give them up because of some hidden danger. As long as he didn't integrate the fragments of the Great Path, these things would never be able to take over his body in the Tao state. Moreover, he always felt that it might not be a bad thing to keep such a possible bridge of communication with the Golden Immortals' consciousness. Cultivation was carried out in the constant correction of deviations. He was alone, because in this process, no one had the ability to give him advice and guide him. There shouldn't be such a person. This was the uniqueness of the Immortals. They were a species that couldn't be bought wholesale. Only if you were special enough, the heavenly axiom might reward you with a mouthful of immortal food. He was also lucky, because in his experience, there were always some processes that benefited him a lot. For example, the understanding of the past in the Odd Righteous Pure Land, and the insight of the future in the Wall of Mirrors. One thing touched him. The Odd Righteous Pure Land was sent to him by the exterior immortal monarch, and he didn't even know the name. The matter of immortal Wu Hua was a task assigned by Lord Ling Bao. These two adventures were directly related to the Immortals. What did it mean? Obviously, the Immortals in the Immortal Court had already started to set up a trap in the mortal world. He was just one of them. There were many Immortals in the Immortal Court, and they all had their own affinity. Lu Xiaoyi had such an opportunity, and the other half-Immortals weren't far off. Then, were the exterior immortal monarch and Lord Lingbao in the same group? If not, it was pardonable that Lord Linglong supported him, but it was a little strange that the exterior immortal monarch helped him. It didn't seem to match at all. It was said that the Crow ancestor didn't do anything good when he was in the exterior realm. He, Lu Xiaoyi, was the same. Chapter 2012. On Lu Xiaoyi's return journey, he did not get lost under the guidance of the empty divine conch. This was the greatest help that this natural spirit treasure had given him. Actually, in terms of their relationship, they were not considered to be master and servant in a contract, but a mutual recognition with Ding Shan's help. The prerequisite for this recognition was that they did not go against the conk's instincts, did not enslave it, and did not take it in. They were just like two friends traveling together. When this journey ended, it would be the time for them to part. This was the tacit understanding between high-level creatures of cultivation, and also a rule, even if the conch did not have consciousness now. After flying like this for a while, he could faintly sense the system of road signs of the wall of reflection, and only then did he put away the empty divine conch. It was best not to let others see this thing, or it would be very troublesome, and he could possibly become a target of scorn and be beaten up by everyone. This was the border of the system of road signs, and usually, very few people would come here. There was nothing to explore in the wall of reflection. There were no astronomical phenomena, no realm, and no historical remains. The mission was only to eliminate the spiritual bodies of resentment, and there was no difference between going deeper and eliminating them in the shallow layer. Thus, no one was willing to venture deeper and take the risk without any reason. There was a strong wave of spiritual opportunity coming over. That was someone fighting. To dare to fight in this place, they were quite bold. Lu Xiaoyi also found his journey of reflection very funny. It seemed that he had been watching people fight all along, but had never gotten involved. It was like this when he met Ding Shan, and it was also like this when he was entangled with the Celestial Elder, and now it was happening again. He still had more than 60% of his cultivation, and it seemed to be enough to support him for a short fight. It was not that he was addicted, but the wave of aura that came over was very strong. That was the aura of a fourth severance, fifth severance, or ancient technique second severance. He was very interested in the fights between seniors. It was not like he would lose a piece of flesh just by watching. It was three great cultivators. One was a second severance Buddhist ancient technique, and two were fourth and fifth blight Taoists of the fourth and fifth blight. The fight was very intense. In this area of the sky, the density of resentment spiritual entities was much higher than in the shallower areas. With the intensity of their battle, it was like a bright light in the wilderness, attracting spiritual entities. However, there were not many spiritual entities around the battleground where the three of them were fighting. The reason was because of the way the three of them were fighting. The three of them were using the incarnation shallow swimming method, and they were constantly moving. They could fight at any time, leave their yang spirits, and move at any time. They used the yang spirit body to attract the attention of their spiritual bodies, but their real bodies were not affected. While they were constantly moving, they always kept themselves in a state of being unhindered. This was actually the most common method that half-immortals used to fight using mirrors. Otherwise, if they didn't restrain themselves when dealing with a single spiritual body, they would only be able to fight more and more spiritual bodies. In the end, they would sink into a sea of spiritual bodies. However, since the three of them dared to use their techniques so unscrupulously in such a deep void, one had to admit that their strength was impressive. At the Tao Realm Scroll of Battle of Techniques, there would be dozens of spiritual entities attracted over at any time, but these spiritual entities would never be able to catch up to the cultivators. They could only follow behind them and eat **T. Although their numbers were increasing, they just couldn't catch up. This was a problem of intelligence. Although the previous incarnations of the resentment spiritual entities were all cultivators of the Blight Realm, their strength was not flexible when they lost their rationality, so they were not difficult to deal with. Lu Xiaoyi followed from afar, not going forward rashly. Just like when adults were fighting, a child could only watch from afar. It was not that he was not strong enough, but that he really did not know which side he should help if he were to make a move. In terms of the circle of inside and outside Jingtian, he should help the ancient monk. In terms of the difference in orthodoxy, he should help the Taoist of the exterior, which was very difficult. According to the universal rules of the cultivation world of the universe, when high-level cultivators fought, low-level cultivators were not allowed to watch. Of course, there were no hard and fast rules. If you wanted to watch, no one would stop you. If you were accidentally injured, you deserved it. Or after both sides stopped, there were high-level cultivators who vented their anger on the bystanders. The rules couldn't save those who deserved to die. However, Lu Xiaoyi was skilled and daring. There was nothing that he didn't dare to watch. It only depended on his mood, and there was no need to worry about whether he should or should not. He was considering whether he should be a peacemaker or not. However, without knowing the grudges between the two sides, such a rash action was inappropriate. If it was in the past, he would not easily get involved in these inexplicable fights. However, after listening to Immortal Wu Hua's experience, he knew that he should continue to expand his influence in the half-immortal level. His current influence could barely cover the level of evildoers. It wasn't that under orders, they would respond to Jing Tsong, but in this level, there was no one who had more influence than him. He could never be the leader, but at least no one could surpass him in influence. These three great cultivators didn't seem like people who would vent their anger. At least after he followed them for a period of time, the three of them didn't express anything about him watching. They didn't chase him away, nor did they secretly harm him. Of course, they didn't have good expressions either. 3 seniors. This mission is about to end. If we argue like this, I'm afraid our return trip will be delayed. The spiritual bodies behind us gathered for no reason. Along the way, they gathered more and became more and more violent. If an ignorant fellow Taoist accidentally provokes them, I'm afraid innocent people will be hurt. Although I have no virtue and no ability, I have a righteous heart. Why don't we stop here and sit down and talk? We don't have to fight to the death. It was best to persuade when the two sides were evenly matched. If one side had the advantage, there was no way to stop them, unless you directly stretched out your hand. Then, it would become a group fight. The ancient monk's moves were swift and fierce, and his Tao realm was unfathomable. He didn't fall into a disadvantageous position even when fighting 1 against 2. The two great cultivators in the Blight tier had deep cultivation. They were stable and shrewd, and they displayed the advantage of the experience they had accumulated over time to the extreme. They also didn't give in an inch. Lu Xiaoyi's interruption immediately caused the three to feel uncomfortable. If one wanted to persuade them to fight, one's status, strength, and reputation were indispensable. It wasn't something that an individual could casually stand out. You, a newcomer in the first Severance primordial divinity transformation, who couldn't even be considered a true half-deity, suddenly stood out. However, the three of them had self-restraint and ignored him, allowing him to bark at the side, which made Lu Xiaoyi feel very bored. This wasn't the outside world, and he wasn't at his peak, so he didn't have the motive to use force. The three great cultivators were still the same, fighting endlessly. When they passed by a road sign, there was an accident. There was a set of rules for cultivators to place road signs on the wall of illumination. This didn't need to be taught. Those who could come here were all half-deities. Even if they weren't proficient in this, they could still understand most of it. Every time a half-deity came to the depths of the illumination realm, the end of the road sign system, if they had the intention in something useful, they would place a road sign on the periphery of this system to expand. The whole road sign system would then expand and eventually cover a very large area of the sky. The key was whether the half-deities had such an item in their hands. Of course, it was impossible to place natural spirit treasures everywhere. Not to mention natural spirit treasures, they couldn't even place acquired spirit treasures. Now, in the entire wall of illumination realm, other than the Leap 8 Heavens Cauldron, there were only 2 natural spirit treasures. Among these so-called items, the most common one was actually a very special kind of void beast. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.